Chapter 4066. Boom. Boom boom boom. Soon Jin Shuang and the 900 godly kings and godly monarchs launched a second round of attacks. Once again, divine techniques, wind, fire and lightning filled the sky. Like a flood, they rained down on the five-colored light barrier, creating earth-shattering explosions. The enormous sound waves spread for tens of thousands of miles before dissipating. The violent shock waves, wrapped in divine light fragments, swept across 80,000 miles. As a result, the mountains in this area collapsed one after another, and the mountain range also collapsed one after another, turning into a desolate ruin. Yellow sand filled the sky, covering the sun, causing everything within tens of thousands of miles to be blurry. The five-colored light barrier once again withstood the fierce attacks. It only trembled and shook violently, but no cracks appeared. The thousands of Nangong clan members finally let out a sigh of relief. Previously, they were worried that this hastily constructed array would not be able to withstand the attacks of Jin Shuang's army. But now it seemed that the efforts of the young mists, the elders and the deacons were not in vain. As time passed, Jin Shuang and the 900 godly kings and godly monarchs continued their attacks. The loud rumbling noises did not stop, and the flashing divine light and devastating shockwaves did not stop either. The five-colored light barrier within 10,000 miles shook more and more violently. 4 hours later, the light barrier's power gradually decreased, and cracks began to appear under the attacks. However, the Nangong clan members desperately repaired the array, replenishing its power so that it could still hold on. 6 hours later, more and more cracks appeared on the formation, densely packed. No matter how hard the Nangong clan members tried, the speed of repairing the cracks could not keep up with the destruction of Jin Shuang's army. 12 hours later, half a day had passed. The cracks on the five-colored light barrier had already turned into dozens of cracks. The long cracks were dozens of feet long and the short ones were more than a foot wide. With so many cracks, many godly king experts could shrink their bodies and pass through them, entering the defensive array. But Jin Shuang and the 7 inspectors did not do so. It was too risky. Once they entered, they would be surrounded by thousands of Nangong clan members. It would be like catching a turtle in a jar. If Nangong Buhua, Nangong Nihuang and the others were hiding in the shadows, waiting for an opportunity, then they would be sending themselves to their deaths. The safest way was to wait for the army to break through the defensive formation before charging in together. Unknowingly, a day had passed just like that. Finally, the defensive formation was riddled with holes and was on the verge of collapse. At this time, Jin Shuang suddenly roared. Holding her sword with both hands, she descended from the sky and slashed at the defensive array that was on the verge of collapse. The inspectors, godly kings and godly lords all made way as their gazes landed on him. Even the Nangong clansmen in the array looked at Jin Shuang, who was descending from the sky, with deep worry and fear. Ha! Jin Shuang roared, holding the sword with both hands and slashing out a 1,000-foot-long, dazzling divine sword light. With a loud boom, the giant sword slashed the five-colored light shield and split it in half. God knows how many fragments of divine light were sent flying to both sides, creating a terrifying hurricane. More than half of the defensive formation had collapsed, but the power of the massive sword didn't diminish in the slightest as it struck the ground again. A 1,000-foot-tall mountain peak was instantly turned into ruins. Over 100 Nangong clansmen were unable to dodge in time and were instantly turned into dust. Such a valiant and heroic scene filled many of the Nangong clan members with fear, and they subconsciously retreated. How could the 7 inspectors and the godly kings let go of such a chance to flatter him? Everyone showed an appropriate expression of worship, clapping and cheering excitedly. Jin Shuang stood in the air, the divine sword in his hand pointed to the ground with an awe-inspiring stance. With this strike, most of the shame and anger in his heart had dissipated and he felt much better. Looking at the collapsed array, the thousands of Nangong clansmen trembling in fear as they retreated as though they were facing a great enemy, he was filled with even more arrogance as he laughed heartily. Ha, Nangong old thief, come out and die. After laughing, he held the divine sword and led the godly kings and godly lords into the array, heading straight for the great light palace on the main peak. The thousands of Nangong clansmen were filled with fear and worry, but they weren't cowardly or timid. They retreated close to 100 miles and formed 2 lines of defense before they stopped retreating. Under the lead of the 3 elders and 20 deacons, they launched a brave counterattack. Charge. Kill. Even if we die in battle, we can't lose face for the Nangong clan. Many hot-blooded young disciples let out stubborn roars. The 3 elders and more than 20 deacons took the lead and charged forward. They unleashed their divine arts with all their might, releasing a divine light that blotted out the sky and covered the sun. Ping ping ping. Boom boom boom. Boom. The 2 groups of people quickly overlapped as they fiercely clashed. The sky was filled with divine techniques as they clashed, creating a deafening explosion that shook the heavens and earth. The divine light covered the sky as the devastating shockwaves shook the earth. Countless fragments of divine light danced in the air. Shouts of killing still reverberated in the heavens and earth. The mountains and forests below their feet, on the other hand, were already collapsing and splitting, turning into desolated ruins. Dust flew, blood splattered, and broken limbs flew in the air. The only thing left in this area was the scene of blood and fire. The most intense exchange of close combat brought about the most tragic battlefield. It was a ghastly sight. Both sides had only exchanged a few blows, but the Nangong clan had suffered heavy casualties and were constantly retreating. No matter if it was the 3 elders and 20 deacons, or the thousands of Nangong clan members, they were no match for Jin Shuang's army. Jin Shuang's side had only lost 30 Sir Gods, but the Nangong clan's casualties had already exceeded 100. If this continued, the thousands of Nangong clan members would be killed within 4 hours. At that time, more than half of Jin Shuang's army would survive. Thinking of this, Jin Shuang's army's morale soared as they charged even more bravely. The thousands of Nangong clan members were anxious as they thought to themselves, why haven't the family head and young miss acted yet? At this moment, the great light palace on the main peak suddenly lit up with a few beams of divine light that shot into the sky as a roar came out. The long roar that pierced through metal and stone broke through the air, causing many mountains to tremble. Jin Shuang raised her head and saw a few divine king experts rushing over in the form of flowing light. The leader was Nangong Buhua, who wore a blue robe and a divine crown. Old Nangong, you can't sit still after all? Jin Shuang's lips curled into a cold smile as she mocked in a disdainful tone. However, Nangong Buhua and the 4 divine king experts did not help the Nangong clan members when they got close. They took out a few divine artifacts and attacked the back of Jin Shuang's army. Swoosh. Swoosh swoosh. A total of 12 divine artifacts landed in the ruins and immediately shot into the sky, forming a huge barrier. Chapter 4067. Seeing the actions of Nangong Buhua and the others, Jin Shuang was clearly confused. The 7 inspectors, 42 godly kings, and many godly lords were also puzzled by this. Logically speaking, Nangong Buhua and the few divine king experts of the Nangong clan should have joined the battle. Why would they take out a divine weapon and set up a formation on the battlefield? Even if they wanted to set up a divine light barrier to block the attack of Jin Shuang's army, it should be between the 2 armies. Why would they set it up behind Jin Shuang's army? What was this? Of course, there were 2 or 3 inspectors who thought they had guessed Nangong Buhua's scheme and quickly shouted to remind everyone. Everyone be careful, this must be old Nangong's scheme. Don't be careless, don't fall into old Nangong's trap. The facts seemed to confirm their guesses. The 5-colored barrier extended in all directions and surrounded Jin Shuang's army. Seeing this, Jin Shuang immediately waved his sword and ordered, "Charge! Destroy them with all your strength and charge into the light palace." Jin Shuang was very calm and his goal was very clear. The divine light barrier could not harm them for the time being and could be ignored. If they wasted time and manpower to destroy the barrier, they would fall into Nangong Buhua's trap. The correct method was to charge forward and destroy the Nangong clan until they reached the light palace. The facts proved that Jin Shuang's method was very wise. He personally led the army under his command and defeated the Nangong clan members like a hot knife through butter, quickly advancing a few hundred miles. Only when Nangong Buhua and several elders stopped them did Jin Shuang and the experts under him stop their charge. The divine light barrier hundreds of miles behind them was still extending to both sides in the sky, but the speed was not fast enough. Not to mention whether the barrier could stop Jin Shuang and the others. Even if it could, the temporary barrier did not have much killing power. Jin Shuang looked at Nangong Buhua, who was hundreds of feet away, and sneered disdainfully. "Old Nangong, have you gone senile? I said I would charge into the light palace. and cut off your head with my own hands. You didn't run for your life and didn't set up a defense in front of you but set up a barrier behind us? Ah. Looks like you've been scared out of your wits and are at a loss for what to do, right? The other inspectors also laughed wildly, mocking Nangong Buhua. Old bastard Nangong, if you know what's good for you, you'd better kneel down and admit defeat. The deputy commander might give you a decent death. Old thief Nangong, I'm afraid it's not enough to just kneel down and admit defeat. It's best if you let your beautiful daughter accompany our deputy commander. Ah. The vice commander gave you a chance before but you insisted on dying. Old Nangong, die obediently. Hearing such filthy words, many elders, deacons and clansmen of the Nangong clan were unable to restrain their anger. Their blood and chi surged and they wished they could fight Jin Shuang's army to the death. However, Nangong Buhua, Nangong Nihuang and the others were not angry. If one looked carefully, they would discover that their eyes were extremely calm and confident, and there was even a trace of mockery hidden in their eyes. The others did not see the problem, but Jin Shuang observed carefully and found some clues. His heart skipped a beat and he had a bad premonition. What's going on? I have already brought people here. The Nangong clan is in a critical situation and they are on the verge of death. Why are they not panicking at all? No. There must be something wrong, could it be? In an instant Jin Shuang guessed a possibility. His pupils shrank and a trace of worry flashed across his eyes. The facts once again confirmed his guess. Nangong Buhua held his head high, looked down at him with a dignified expression, and said in a sonorous voice, Jin Shuang, haven't you always said that you want to see the Kenshin in person? Now you've got your wish. After speaking, he did not care about the reaction of Jin Shuang and the other inspectors, and turned to look in the direction of the Light Palace. Nangong Nihuang and the several elders also looked sideways at the main peak, a smile and expectant expression on their faces. At this moment, everyone was shocked and silent. Jin Shuang and the inspectors, god kings and divine lords under his command all had a look of astonishment, and their eyes were filled with disbelief. And everyone in the Nangong clan had a look of surprise and relief, and many people even cheered. Unknowingly, all the Nangong clan people had regarded Kenshin as their most reliable backer. And Jin Shuang and the god kings and divine lords under his command were filled with fear of Kenshin. Zhoosh. At this moment a white light lit up in the Light Palace, and soared into the sky. It was a handsome and valiant white figure. Although it was very far away and could not be seen clearly, it was still very blurry. But his extraordinary appearance, mysterious and dignified aura still made everyone's heart palpitate. Zhoosh. The next moment the white figure casually took a step forward, crossed the 8,000 miles of sky and came to the battlefield. He stood in front of Nangong Buhua and Nangong Nihuang, looking calmly at Jin Shuang with a faint smile on his lips. Everyone's eyes were gathered on him at this moment. Thousands of pairs of eyes stared at him, revealing all kinds of complicated expressions. He was the same as before. His robe was as white as snow and his long hair fluttered in the wind. He was indescribably handsome, elegant and mysterious. That's right, he was Ji Tianxing who had just finished his secluded cultivation. After he had broken through to the peak of the God King stage, he had cultivated for a period of time to stabilize his foundation and strength. Although, after he finished his secluded cultivation, there was a small incident in the distorted spacetime. But when he released his divine senses, he found that the Nangong clan was surrounded by strong enemies, so he put that matter aside and came out of seclusion first. Originally, he wanted to attack directly and destroy Jin Shuang's army with the power to destroy them. But Nangong Buhua and Nangong Nihuang dissuaded him and specially arranged such an entrance. Nangong Buhua told him that this was his first battle after returning to the God world, and it was very important. Not only did this battle have to be won beautifully, but it also had to be won easily and shockingly. After all, there were many forces watching in the dark, estimating his strength and thinking of how to bargain with him. Ji Tianxing did not mind following Nangong Buhua's advice and listened to it. Reality proved that such an appearance was indeed a pleasant surprise, and also left a deep impression on people. Jin Shuang, it has been many years since we last met. Do you have any last words? Ji Tianxing looked at Jin Shuang with a smile that was not a smile and said these words calmly. It did not sound angry or murderous, as if he was saying goodbye to a passerby. Jin Shuang frowned fiercely, his eyes surging with anger. Although he was nervous, he was not afraid at all. With a dignified aura, he sneered and said, "Everyone knows that Kenshin's sword cultivation is unparalleled in the world, and his strength is incomparably strong. But you are heavily injured and you are alone. How are you going to defend against me and my 800 elite soldiers? Today I will kill you and use you as a stepping stone to become famous." Chapter 4068. If Jin Shuang could really kill Kenshin, that would fulfill his wish. He could really soar to the heavens and become famous in the god realm. Moreover, the Azura God Emperor would definitely reward him heavily and treat him as the #1 meritorious official. As for Kenshin, he would be killed by Jin Shuang in his first battle after returning to the god realm. This was definitely more humiliating than death. His legend would be shattered and he would become the laughingstock of the entire god realm. The two words Kenshin would also be quickly forgotten by the world. Even if people occasionally mentioned it, it would be the object of ridicule. But all of these were hypotheses, and what? The reality was like this. Ji Tianqing chuckled and raised his right hand. Pinching his sword fingers, he pointed towards Jin Shuang's army. Xiu. Xiu Xiu. 3 consecutive golden sword lights pierced through the air like lightning. Everyone only caught a glimpse of them before they exploded in the crowd. The divine monarchs under Jin Shuang did not even have time to react, let alone dodge or block. Even the 42 divine monarchs only saw the sword lights appear and did not have time to react. Ji Tianqing only casually pointed and sent out 3 simple sword lights. However, they contained many profound meanings of the way of the sword. The seemingly simple golden sword lights that were only 300 meters long actually contained more than 200 types of law divine power. Moreover, they were extremely fast and contained sword intent that reached the heavens. This was the peak of the way of the sword in the world. Bang bang bang. Amidst the deafening sound, flesh and blood flew in the crowd and screams sounded everywhere. At least 80 divine monarchs were killed on the spot by the sword lights. Their bodies turned into minced meat and blood splattered on the ruins. There were also 30 divine monarchs nearby who were lucky enough to keep their lives. However, they were also heavily injured by the sword intent and the shockwaves. Covered in blood, they fell into the ruins and let out miserable cries. The crowd immediately exploded. Hundreds of divine monarchs let out terrified screams and roars as they scattered in all directions. The formation was instantly thrown into chaos. Even the 40 divine monarchs and 7 inspectors subconsciously moved to the sides, afraid of being affected. Jin Shuang still stood at the front of the crowd and did not dodge. However, his expression was extremely ugly, and his eyes were filled with shame, anger, and killing intent. Ji Tianqing did not refute his provocation. Instead, he used practical actions to give the best answer. Kenshin had casually pointed a finger and instantly killed nearly 100 divine lord masters. Was this seriously wounded? You Jin Shuang are merely an 8th degree realm god king. How dare you clamor about killing Kenshin? How laughable. At this moment, everyone present seemed to have heard a resounding slap. But no matter how angry Jin Shuang was, no matter how much she feared Kenshin, it was impossible for her to escape without fighting. He glared angrily at Ji Tianqing and slowly raised his divine sword. The aura around his body rose crazily as the divine power in his body gathered violently. Everyone thought that he was seething with anger and was going to fight Kenshin himself. But to everyone's surprise, he waved his sword fiercely and roared, "Everyone listen to my orders. Surround and kill Kenshin at all costs." When his voice fell, he took the lead and rushed out, leading all the soldiers under his command to kill Ji Tianqing with all their might. Obviously, Jin Shuang was not blinded by anger and still remained calm. He didn't forget that Sword God was Emperor God Xiu Luo's greatest enemy and the person he wanted to kill the most. As long as he could kill Kenshin, even if he and all his subordinates died here, it would be worth it. Kill Kenshin and make a name for yourself. Whoever can take Kenshin's head will definitely be rewarded with the greatest merit. Even if we die, we must drag Kenshin down with us. In the midst of the charge, several inspectors and many god kings shouted. They really did not care about anything else. Seeing such a scene, Nangong Mi Huang, several elders and many deacons' hearts were raised. There were even people who scolded Jin Shuang and the others. Damn it! They actually besieged Kenshin without caring about their lives. More than 800 people besieging Kenshin. Who can withstand this? Jin Shuang, this sinister old man, he is too despicable. Everyone, don't just stand there. Let's help Kenshin together. In the end, the elder's words were stuck in his throat before he could finish his sentence. Because in the next moment they saw what it meant to be invincible. Even in the face of the siege of Jin Shuang and more than 800 god kings and monarchs, Ji Tianqing was calm and composed, his expression calm. He did not take a step back, nor did he take out his divine sword or weapon. He just casually raised his palms and stabbed his 10 fingers straight at Jin Shuang's army. His slender and crystal-like fingers actually burst forth with hundreds of dazzling sword lights, carrying the power to destroy heaven and earth, interweaving a huge sword net in the sky. At the same time, dazzling golden light burst forth from his body, condensing into a huge wall of light behind him. At this moment he was as dazzling as the sun, making it hard for people to look at him directly. The seemingly thin golden wall of light was like an indomitable wall between him and the Nangong clan members. Boom 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 boom. The attacks of Jin Shuang and the 800 god kings and monarchs all hit the golden wall of light, creating a huge explosion that shook heaven and earth. However, the wall of golden light continued to tremble, but not a single crack appeared. Instead, the divine technique attacks of Jin Shuang and the others were all shattered and disintegrated on the spot. Immediately after, Ji Tianqing sent out hundreds of sword lights, forming a huge sword net that enveloped Jin Shuang's army. Xiu. Xiu xiu xiu. The sword lights were faster than the speed of light, flying through the sky, piercing through and killing one god monarch after another, god king after god king. Pu piu piu sounds came one after another. It was the sound of the sword lights piercing through the bodies. Thousands of Nangong clan members saw Jin Shuang's 800 god kings and monarchs trembling in the sky as if they were dancing. Their foreheads, the back of their heads, their hearts and other vital parts were all pierced by the sword lights, bringing out streams of blood that fell from the sky. Every time someone's head was pierced by the sword light, their god head would shatter and they would die on the spot, their corpse falling down powerlessly. However, the corpse would not fall into the ruins, it would be cut into pieces by the sword net, turning into drops of blood and debris that fell into the ruins. Other than the sound of the sword lights piercing through the air, there were only the screams of Jin Shuang's army, angry roars and the shocked cries of the Nangong clan members. Before this, no one would have thought that someone could be so powerful, to be able to fight against 800 experts and experts by himself. No one had ever seen the way of the sword being used like this, to be able to kill enemies so pleasing to the eye. Ji Tianqing sent out hundreds of sword lights as if they were alive and intelligent. Other than the sword lights, he did nothing else. He just put his hands behind his back and quietly watched Jin Shuang's army. After 100 breaths, the power of the hundreds of sword lights was used up and they finally disappeared. As for the 800 god monarchs under Jin Shuang, they were all killed. Of the 42 god kings, only 22 were left and they were all heavily injured. Chapter 4069. The entire place was silent. Everyone was stupefied. Thousands of Nangong clan members were shocked as they looked at the battlefield in disbelief. They looked at the miserable Jin Shuang and the others. As for Jin Shuang, the 7 inspectors and the 22 divine kings, they looked at the empty sky in a daze. There were more than 800 people just now, but now there were only 30 left. The Nangong clan members watched from the side and did not help at all. Ji Tianqing alone killed more than 800 people with one move. They could not believe that this was real. Jin Shuang and the 29 surviving divine kings finally realized what terror was. In their understanding, even if it was a peak divine king, they should not be powerful to such an extent either. This was simply unreasonable. Previously, Jin Shuang and the others thought that no matter how strong Kenshin was, he was alone. As long as they paid a heavy price, they would definitely be able to kill Kenshin. But now it seemed that this was an unrealistic fantasy. Just Kenshin alone could kill all of them. Under such circumstances, if they did not escape, they would be completely wiped out. After Jin Shuang and the others regained their senses, they did not hesitate to turn around and escape towards the Grotto Heaven's exit. The plan to kill Kenshin had already failed. Through this operation they also proved that Kenshin was not injured and was very powerful. They were satisfied with this result. The most important thing now was to save their lives. Whoosh, whoosh whoosh. 35 colored streaks of light streaked across the sky and escaped as fast as lightning. Even those domain lords and divine kings who were heavily injured and covered in blood released their last bit of potential and raised their speed to the limit. However, when they saw the situation in front of them, their expressions changed drastically. They all revealed expressions of anger and despair. This was because in front of them, to their left and right and above their heads, there was a huge five-colored barrier. This was the useless barrier that Nangong Buhua and the other elders took out dozens of divine artifacts to form. Previously, Jin Shuang and the others were still laughing at Nangong Buhua. Were they scared silly and did not know what to do? They actually set up a barrier behind them that did not threaten them at all. Now they finally understood the use of the barrier. It turned out that Nangong Buhua and the others had predicted this outcome when they first appeared. That was why they had set up a barrier in advance. That barrier was not used to deal with them but to prevent them from escaping. This was too ironic. Jin Shuang and the others were incomparably humiliated, but compared to their lives, that bit of humiliation was nothing. Everyone assist me and break through it. At such a critical moment, there was no room for hesitation. Even the slightest delay would cause the escape to fail. As a result, Jin Shuang made a prompt decision to gather everyone's strength at one point and break through the multicolored barrier. Swish, swish. The 7 inspectors and the 22 god kings reacted quickly and immediately gathered behind Jin Shuang, simultaneously releasing their god force into his body. Jin Shuang's godly power exploded. Her body swayed and her robes fluttered. She held the godly sword with both hands and stabbed at the five-colored barrier. He had gathered the power of 29 god kings, and his battle prowess had increased by at least 5 times. As for the five-colored barrier, it was only a temporary defensive wall formed by Nangong Buhua and the others' divine artifacts. His power would not be too strong. Seeing that Jin Shuang and the others were like a huge sharp blade, fiercely stabbing towards the five-colored barrier. In the next moment, the five-colored barrier was about to be penetrated or even collapse. At this critical moment, Ji Tianqing calmly took a step forward and teleported in front of Jin Shuang and the others. Then he turned to face Jin Shuang and the others and casually punched. The punch that seemed neither fast nor slow and was calm and peaceful, contained 100% of his strength, 300 types of law god force and a soul-stirring power. Boom. Following a deafening sound, a mountain-sized dragon-elephant fist fiercely smashed into Jin Shuang's sword. Although the dragon-elephant phantom was shattered, Jin Shuang's full-powered strike was also destroyed. The berserk godly power fiercely smashed into Jin Shuang and the others. Not only were more than 300 types of laws and divine powers blasted apart, but even the invisible power of the spirit had also exploded. Thousands of Nangong clansmen saw Jin Shuang and the other 29 god kings fly out like broken sacks, tumbling hundreds of miles away. Especially Jin Shuang, who bore the brunt of the attack. His godly body could not withstand such power, and actually exploded on the spot, turning into a sky full of blood and debris. The few inspectors behind him as well as a few heavily injured god kings were also killed on the spot, not even their bones were left. Ji Tianqing's seemingly ordinary punch was actually able to defeat 30 god kings, and instantly kill 8 of them. Such terrifying power was beyond everyone's imagination. Plop, plop. A moment later, more than 20 god kings who were lucky not to die fell into the ruins in disorder, and dust filled the sky. The few who were already killed had their godhead fragments scattered in the ruins. Jin Shuang's luck was not bad, only his godly body was destroyed. His godhead was still intact and he was running around wildly. Front, back, left and right were all blocked. It was either the five-colored barrier or the thousands of Nangong clansmen. He had nowhere to run. In a moment of desperation, his godhead could only drill into the ground, hoping to escape through the ground. But just as his godhead drilled into the ground, Ji Tianqing pointed a finger at the ground, and the power of tens of thousands of miles of earth gathered, turning into a sword light that soared into the sky. That earthen yellow sword light pierced Jin Shuang's godhead without any deviation. With a crisp shattering sound, Jin Shuang's godhead collapsed on the spot and he died. The remaining 20 or so god kings were all covered in blood, missing limbs and miserably lying in the ruins. Even if they still had the strength to fly, they did not dare to act rashly, and also dispelled the thought of running away. Seeing Ji Tianqing walk over in the air, they were all scared out of their wits, and endured the humiliation as they knelt on the ground and begged for mercy. For a moment the place was filled with wails. Ji Tianqing frowned, ignored the 20 or so god kings who were severely injured and gave Nangong Buhua a look. Nangong Buhua immediately understood and immediately ordered the elders and deacons of the Nangong clan to go forward and capture the God Kings. Whoosh! Ji Tianxing flew across the sky, and under the respectful and admiring gazes of all the Nangong clan members, he flew toward the light palace on the main peak. Nangong Buhua, Nangong Nihuang, and the others hurriedly followed and rushed toward the light palace. They knew that Kenshin would definitely give the order to start the operation. As for the elders and 20 deacons, they escorted the 20 or so God Kings who were captured to the Nangong clan's dungeon. The thousands of Nangong clan members came back to their senses and started to clean up the battlefield and the ruins. Chapter 40-70. Ji Tianxing did not have to worry about the aftermath. The Nangong clan would take care of it. Whether it was cleaning up the battlefield, rebuilding the palaces and residences, or imprisoning and interrogating the deity kings, the Nangong clan would take care of it. After an hour, the Yenshu heavenly abode regained its peace. Although there was still a huge gap in the defensive formation that needed to be fixed, there was no hurry. Nangong Buhua sat at the head of the table with Nangong Nihuang beside him. Ji Tianxing sat on the left while the elders sat on the right. It was a simple and straightforward meeting. The two elders reported the results of the battle. Master Lord Kenshin, we won the battle, but more than 800 of our people were killed and more than 300 were injured. We have arranged for them to be treated. Jin Shuang's army, except for the 3 deity warships that escaped, we killed 952 of them and captured 24 deity kings. The 24 of them were severely injured, including 13 region masters. They are currently locked up in our dungeon, guarded by 3 elders and 20 deacons. The interrogations are still ongoing and we expect the results within a day. Although the Nangong clan had many casualties, it was nothing compared to the tens of thousands of Nangong clan members. Moreover, they had almost annihilated Jin Shuang's army and killed him. This was news that would shock the boundless heaven continent, no, the entire realm of the gods. Nangong Buhua nodded slightly, showing that he was satisfied with the results. He ordered, "Send people to fix the gap in the defensive formation immediately. Even if we have to mobilize the entire clan, we must fix it as soon as possible. Otherwise, the Yenshu heavenly abode will be open at any time and it will not be safe. Also, the news of Jin Shuang's army being annihilated will spread quickly. Not only will many forces pay attention to it, but the imperial tutor Meng Shuai and Commander Qi Yan will also know. They will be furious. From now on, we must strengthen our patrols and security, in case the imperial tutor and Meng Shuai retaliates and seeks revenge." The several elders bowed in unison and said, "Yes, sir." Everyone's gaze fell on Ji Tianxing, waiting for him to speak. After all, he was the only one who had the right to decide what to do next. Under everyone's gaze, Ji Tianxing said in a calm tone, "Today's battle will spread throughout the boundless heaven continent very soon. The major forces that have been watching us in the dark should know that it's time to make a choice. Nangong family head, I'll leave this matter to you. Inform all the family heads and family heads of the ancient clans as soon as possible and invite them to Yenshu Cave for a meeting. In addition to the forces loyal to the Azure God Emperor, there were more than a dozen top forces who were also invited. The time limit is 1 month. After that, I won't wait for you." Ji Tianxing was finally going to gather all the major factions and ancient clans to unite against the Azure God Emperor. However, Nangong Buhua, Nangong Nihuang, and the other elders were stunned when they heard his words. Everyone was shocked and in disbelief. Nangong Buhua frowned and asked, "Kenshin, are you sure you want to inform all the ancient clans and the top forces that are not loyal to the Shura God Emperor?" Others did not know, but everyone present was well aware. Although 70 to 80% of the forces and clans wanted to rebel against the Azure God Emperor's rule. However, there were very few clans and forces that were willing to support and follow Kenshin. Most of the ancient clans and top forces wanted to protect themselves and did not care about worldly affairs. Why would they come to Yenshu Cave for a meeting? If Ji Tianxing did this, not only would he not be able to gather a large number of allies and rebels, but it would also leak the information and reveal the timing of his action. However, Ji Tianxing seemed to have overlooked this point. He nodded without hesitation and said, "That's right." Nangong Buhua hesitated for a moment and said with a bitter smile, "But we all know that those guys have their own agendas and will not follow you openly." Ji Tianxing nodded to show that he understood and said, "You just need to send out a message and inform them. As for whether they come or not, that's their business." Seeing Ji Tianxing's firm attitude, Nangong Buhua and the rest guessed that he must have his own plans. Therefore Nangong Buhua stopped persuading him and nodded to show that he understood. Next Nangong Buhua and the other elders asked Ji Tianxing if he had any orders. What preparations did he need the Nangong clan to do? Ji Tianxing smiled and said, "The Nangong clan has already done what needs to be done. You can handle this matter." Nangong Buhua and the other elders felt that he was not that sad about this matter and did not feel nervous at all. They could not help but wonder. However, Ji Tianxing did not explain and they could not ask further. They could only suppress their doubts in their hearts. The meeting ended quickly. Ji Tianxing left the Divine Light Palace and returned to the secret room in his residence. He returned to the distorted space-time. Only Nangong Buhua and the rest were left in the main hall. The elders looked at the clan leader and asked, "Clan leader, do we really not need to do anything else and only need to recuperate?" Nangong Buhua nodded and said, "Since Kenshin has no other orders, it means that he has a card up his sleeve. You don't have to worry and just focus on recuperating. Moreover, everyone has seen with their own eyes how terrifying Kenshin's strength is. I am sure that other than the 5 god emperors, no one in this world is his match. So what are you worried about?" Hearing that what he said made sense, everyone no longer hesitated and left the Divine Light Palace to carry out their tasks. Only Nangong Buhua and Nangong Nihuang were left in the main hall and it immediately quieted down. Nangong Nihuang looked at her father and asked, "Father, what tasks do you have for me?" Nangong Buhua thought for a while and said, "There is nothing for you to do. If you have nothing to do, you can patrol Yanshu Cave and strengthen the defenses. Also, if you have nothing to do, you can spend more time with Long Tian to prevent him from inconveniencing himself." Nangong Nihuang heard and naturally understood what her father meant. Her eyes flashed with a tinge of shyness and she nodded and left. The people of the Nangong clan were still busy. Ji Tianxing had already returned to the distorted space-time to settle the small matter that he had put aside previously. Although it was a small matter, it was actually not a small matter. After all, this matter was discovered by the Blood Illusion God and it was related to the Blood Flame Sacred Tree. Many years ago the Blood Illusion God did not have a body. It was Ji Tianxing who used a branch of the Blood Flame Sacred Tree to refine his body. From then on, the Blood Illusion God of the God Lord realm possessed the body of a God King and shone with the second glory of his life. Now that he had already broken through to the God King level, his title was changed to the Blood Illusion God King. Previously in the battle on the Heavenly Policy Star, the Blood Illusion God King fought bravely and was severely injured. He was on the verge of death and almost lost his life. At the critical moment, fortunately, Jiku and the Sword of Burial of Heaven saved his life and saved his life. He originally thought that even if he returned to the distorted spacetime, he would need to recuperate for a few hundred years to recover. Who would have thought? Chapter 4071. A few months had passed in the outside world, but the Blood Fantasy Deity King had only been recuperating in the distorted spacetime for 20 years. He did not expect that his injuries had already recovered by 70 to 80%. He was no longer in danger. Such an exaggerated recovery speed made the Blood Fantasy Deity King feel incredulous. When Lin Shui, Chao Qingyu and the rest found out, they exclaimed in amazement and asked the Blood Fantasy Deity King how he did it. The Blood Fantasy Deity King carefully recalled and racked his brains, but he could not find the reason. In the end, he briefly explained the process of treating his injuries to everyone. Back then he was seriously injured and on the verge of death. He was in a semi-conscious and semi-conscious state when he returned to the distorted spacetime in a daze. His body was on the verge of shattering. He fell on the platform under the sacred tree and fell into a coma. His injuries were very serious. Not only was his body on the verge of collapse, his soul was also seriously injured and on the verge of collapse. But after a few years of deep sleep he actually woke up. Then he found that his injuries had healed and almost recovered by half. Even the injuries to his soul had unknowingly healed by half. Then he could still feel that the Blood Flame Sacred Tree was continuously injecting energy into him to help him heal his injuries. Just like that, his injuries were mostly healed in just 20 years. This clearly proved that his miraculous recovery was due to the Blood Flame Sacred Tree. Chao Qingyu, Lin Shui and the rest also expressed their belief and agreement with this answer. After all, for so many years, they had also received immeasurable benefits from the Blood Flame Sacred Tree. But they only absorbed the power of the Blood Flame Sacred Tree. Every time their souls were injured, They did not feel that the sacred tree was helping them heal. Therefore, this discovery attracted everyone's attention. At that time, Ji Tianxing had just finished his seclusion. After knowing about this, he wanted to study it. He did not expect that Jin Shuang's army had already broken through Yanshu's grotto heaven and was about to reach the Great Hall of Light. Therefore, Ji Tianxing could only go and deal with Jin Shuang's army first and put this matter aside. Now he returned to the Blood Flame Sacred Tree. Lin Shui, the Blood Fantasy Deity King, Chao Qingyu and the rest were still waiting for him. Seeing that he had arrived, everyone quickly gathered around him and excitedly told him about a new discovery. Young master, we've made a new discovery through comparison and research. Ji Tianxing's interest was piqued. He quickly asked, what did you find? Shui Lin was full of excitement and said with bright eyes, before we could only absorb the power of the Bloodfire Sacred Tree, but our souls didn't benefit. However, Shui Huan was different. His body was a branch of the Blood Flame Sacred Tree, and his soul had somehow formed a connection with the Blood Flame Sacred Tree. This is the reason why the Blood Flame Sacred Tree can heal him but not us. Chao Qingyu and Yang nodded in agreement. The Blood Illusion God King also smiled and said, young master, I can indeed feel that my soul has some sort of connection with the Blood Flame Sacred Tree. I can always feel that a trace of my soul has merged with the sacred tree. Even when I was heavily injured and on the verge of death, I didn't feel fear because I didn't feel that death was coming. I even have the illusion that even if I die, my consciousness and soul can be reborn from the Blood Flame Sacred Tree. At this point, the Blood Illusion God King scratched his head in embarrassment and said, maybe what I said sounds a little exaggerated and bizarre, but I guarantee that it's true. Ji Tianxing patted him on the shoulder and gave him an encouraging look. He said, don't worry, we've seen things even more exaggerated and bizarre than this. We believe in you. Shui Lin, Chao Qingyu and the rest also nodded in agreement. Originally, the Blood Illusion God King was still feeling uneasy, but seeing everyone's reaction he immediately felt relieved. Next, everyone looked at Ji Tianxing and asked him what he thought. Ji Tianxing raised his head and looked at the Blood Flame Sacred Tree. He smiled and said, when I first obtained this Blood Flame Sacred Tree, it was only a monarch-level tree. After so many years of nurturing, it actually grew to a superior king-level tree. It's really unbelievable. In all the 3,000 worlds, this tree should be the world's #1 sacred tree. Since a trace of Blood Illusion's soul could merge with the Blood Flame Sacred Tree, it would provide him with a layer of protection and also give him an extra life. Then I have a bold idea. Maybe we can merge a trace of our souls into the Blood Flame Sacred Tree. No matter what dangers we encounter in the future, no matter how serious the injuries we receive, as long as the Blood Flame Sacred Tree doesn't perish, we will have an extra life and a chance of revival. Hearing his suggestion, everyone's blood boiled and they were filled with excitement and anticipation. Yes, this suggestion is great. Haha, I had the same idea just now. I have the same idea as the Lord. This is a superior king-level sacred tree. It should be one of the most difficult things to destroy in the world, right? If we merge a trace of our souls into it, it will be foolproof. We won't die no matter how injured we are. This idea is great, but we still have to think about how to implement it. Everyone was very interested in this suggestion and could not wait to study it. Ji Tianxing was the first to try. He released his divine sense to communicate with the Blood Flame Sacred Tree and tried to use his divine sense to connect with it. Logically speaking, the Blood Flame Sacred Tree was his and he had nurtured it for so many years. As the owner of the Blood Flame Sacred Tree, he should be able to communicate with the sacred tree and merge his divine sense with it. But in reality, things were not that simple. The Blood Flame Sacred Tree was not a living thing and it had not gained sentience. Divine sense could not enter it and merge with it. Everyone had to think of a reasonable way to merge their divine sense into the sacred tree. Lin Shui proposed the first suggestion. Everyone should eat a divine fruit from the Blood Flame Sacred Tree and use the fruit's power to strengthen their connection with the sacred tree. This idea sounded feasible, so everyone started to try it out. After each of them consumed a divine fruit, they did indeed receive great benefits. Their divine power increased slightly. But when they tried to merge their divine sense with the Blood Flame Sacred Tree, there was still no reaction. Chao Qingyu proposed the second suggestion. Everyone's divine sense directly merged with the sacred tree. Did not seem realistic. Why not focus on one branch and use their divine sense to nourish and refine it? This might work. This suggestion was very reliable and sounded very feasible. So everyone started to try again. Half a month later, everyone used their divine sense to nourish the target branch until it glowed. But they still could not merge their divine sense. This suggestion was a failure. Then Ji Tianxing proposed two very important issues. First, everyone had to find a way to strengthen their connection with the blood flame sacred tree. Secondly, they had to separate a wisp of their spiritual energy and separate it from their own. Only then would they be able to merge with the bloody fire sacred tree. Chapter 4072. The two questions that Ji Tianxing raised were indeed very important. Everyone knew that it made sense, but they all fell into hesitation. The first question was easy to answer, but the second question was the key. The souls of everyone present were complete, and the soul was a very mysterious and complicated thing. Rashly cutting off a strand of the soul would definitely cause great harm to the body, and there might even be unforeseen dangers. For example, it would affect the soul, consciousness and thinking, lose some memories or abilities, and even affect the foundation of the divine path in the realm of strength. All the above dangers were very likely to happen, and no one dared to be careless. Thus, everyone fell silent and regained their composure. Ji Tianxing looked around and said with a smile, "Let me try first." Just as he finished speaking, the blood fantasy god king hurriedly stopped him. "Young master, you must not. You are carrying out a very important plan now, and there must not be any mistakes. Let me do it." Lin Shui quietly tugged at the blood fantasy god king's sleeve and reminded him softly, "You have already fused a strand of your soul with the sacred tree. How can you still try?" The blood fantasy god king scratched his head awkwardly and could only step back. Then Lin Shui, Chao Qingyu and Yank stepped forward at the same time and said firmly, "Let me do it." Left emissary Jean and blood dragon Right also came over and said hot-bloodedly, "Let me do it." Ji Tianxing looked at the two of them and persuaded, "It was not easy for the two of you to break through to the divine king realm, and now you have not even stabilized your realms, so don't come and join in the fun." Left emissary Jean and blood dragon Right were persuaded to go back, but Lin Shui, Chao Qingyu and Yank still insisted. However, Ji Tianxing stopped the three of them and said earnestly, "This blood flame sacred tree was raised by me, and I am its master, so I know it best. Moreover, I have the most experience in cultivating the divine path, so of course I will try first. After I succeed, I will teach you how to do it. Even if I don't succeed, at least I will not let myself be hurt. Don't worry, my control of the soul is meticulous, nothing will happen." No one could dissuade him, so they could only agree to let him try. Of course, everyone knew that he was protecting them, and their hearts were filled with gratitude. Not long after, Ji Tianxing began to cast a spell, carefully dividing the soul. Everyone sat around him, wholeheartedly protecting him. They didn't even dare to breathe loudly, let alone make the slightest sound for fear of disturbing him. Even though severing a strand of soul was an extremely dangerous, complicated and troublesome matter, it was still not enough. However, Ji Tianxing's control over his soul was indeed extraordinarily meticulous. 10 days passed quietly. He successfully separated a wisp of his soul and condensed it into a ball of white light in front of him. The divine soul that looked like a white mist was only the size of a walnut, but it contained pure divine soul power, consciousness and memories. However, after it left Ji Tianxing's body, it couldn't stay in the distorted space for too long. It had to attach itself to something. Moreover, Ji Tianxing had just separated a wisp of his soul, so it still affected his body and made him weaker than before. However, he didn't care about recuperating and adjusting his breath. He hurriedly used his divine soul power to nourish a branch of the blood flame sacred tree, and began to try to merge it. The platform was silent and time passed quietly. Lin Shui, Chao Qingyu and the rest remained silent. They stared at Ji Tianxing attentively, observing how he would cast the spell. Everyone's hearts were also in their mouths, and they were worried and anxious for Ji Tianxing. Fortunately, Ji Tianxing's casting process was very stable and there were no abnormalities. His expression was also very calm, and his divine soul were in a normal state. Day after day passed and everyone's anxious hearts gradually relaxed. Another 10 days later, above everyone's head, the branch that was about 1 meter long gradually changed from a purplish-red color to a layer of light gold. Seeing this special change, everyone was excited and full of excitement and anticipation. After waiting for another 3 days, Ji Tianxing finally finished casting the spell and opened his eyes. Everyone hurriedly surrounded him and asked about his well-being and how he was doing. Ji Tianqing smiled and said, "I've made you worry. The process was very smooth and I succeeded. Now I also have a wisp of my divine soul attached to this blood flame sacred tree, which is equivalent to having another life-saving talisman." When everyone heard this, they immediately cheered excitedly. "Wow, that's great. You finally succeeded, my lord is really amazing." "That's great." After cheering, everyone looked at Ji Tianqing and listened to him explain the process of casting the spell, the things to pay attention to, and his summary of his experience. He spoke carefully one by one so that everyone could understand clearly and not miss anything. After all, this matter was very important to everyone and there was no room for mistakes. Half a day later, Ji Tianqing imparted his experience to everyone and answered all their questions. Then Lin Shui volunteered to be the first to try. Ji Tianqing, Chao Qingyu, and the others all expressed their encouragement and support for her bravery. Thus, Lin Shui began to follow Ji Tianqing's instructions and cut her divine soul to fuse with the sacred tree. Ji Tianqing, Chao Qingyu, and the others helped to protect her and keep an eye on her situation. The process did not need to be described in detail. Although there was a small incident under Ji Tianqing's protection, it could be considered a daunting experience without any mishap. After more than 20 days, Lin Shui's wisp of divine soul successfully fused with a branch of the blood flame sacred tree. The purple-black branch was also covered with a layer of white fluorescence that flowed slowly, and it was very special. Lin Shui succeeded. Next, Chao Qingyu, Yang Lon, and the others all tried one by one under Ji Tianqing's guidance. Chao Qingyu took 22 days to successfully fuse a wisp of divine soul into the sacred tree. Lon took 24 days to complete while Yang only took 18 days. This did not mean that Yang was more talented and stronger than the couple, but that Yang's thinking was simpler and more direct. After they all succeeded, Gold Left Emissary and Blood Dragon Right Emissary, who had been cultivating for a few months, also rushed over to join in the fun. Thus, everyone imparted their experience and tricks to them and protected them together, allowing them to successfully fuse a wisp of divine soul. Unknowingly, half a year passed. Yun Yao and Ji Wushuang finished cultivating and woke up. Seeing that everyone was gathered under the blood flame sacred tree and seemed to be studying something, the mother and daughter flew over. Everyone greeted and exchanged greetings. After that, Yun Yao asked Ji Tianqing what had happened. Ji Tianqing told Yun Yao the whole story. After hearing this, Yun Yao smiled and said with worry and some reproach, "You're too mischievous. You've already fused with the Five Elements world. As long as the Five Elements world is not destroyed, you won't die. It's enough to have the Five Elements world to protect your life. Why did you risk splitting your divine soul and fusing it with the sacred tree? What if something went wrong when you split your divine soul?" Halfway through her words, she suddenly understood Ji Tianqing's good intentions and stopped the topic. "Sai, I know you're doing this for everyone's sake. You're trying to find a way to save everyone's lives." Chapter 4073. Yun Yao understood one thing a long time ago. The reason why Ji Tianqing was more popular and loved than other experts was because he treated people with sincerity. Other experts treated their followers as loyal subordinates and as sharp blades in their hands. However, Ji Tianqing was different. He treated the people who followed him as his friends. If there were benefits, he would never treat his friends unfairly. If there was danger, he would always face it himself and do his best to protect everyone. Who would not respect and support such an expert? It was because of this that everyone knew that his revenge plan was to fight against the five god emperors, but they still followed him wholeheartedly and helped him. Even Yang and Bai Feng, who were defeated by him and forcibly taken in as god kings, would follow him loyally after interacting with him for a long time. It was basically impossible for this to happen to other powerhouses. Therefore, Yun Yao could understand and support Ji Tianqing taking the risk to seek a way to save everyone's lives. As for Ji Tianqing, when he heard his wife's slightly reproachful words, he knew that Yun Yao was worried about him. Therefore, he held her hand and comforted her with a smile. "Yao Yao, don't worry. Since I'm doing this, I'm definitely prepared and confident. Although the process is a little dangerous, I think it's worth it to give everyone another way to save their lives. Since you and Wushuang are here, I'll pass on the method and experience to you. You can also split a strand of your divine soul and merge it into the blood flame sacred tree." Yun Yao shook her head lightly and said gently, "To me, Wushuang, Wuhan and Cuckoo, our strongest backing and life-saving trump card is actually you. As long as you live we won't die. And if you're not here one day we won't be alive either. Although Ji Tianqing was very touched, he still wanted to refute this statement. Yao Yao, this is unfair to the children. Cuckoo, we can live and die together. But the children are still young and have their own lives. Even if we're not here one day they should live well. Otherwise, who will inherit our wishes and avenge us? Yun Yao was a little shaken. She nodded and said, all right, my idea is indeed a little selfish. I didn't think it through enough. Then, let's give it a try. Thus, Ji Tianqing personally imparted his experience to Yun Yao and Ji Wushuang, teaching them how to cast spells. Both mother and daughter were very intelligent. Ji Tianqing only needed to explain it once before they learned it. Next, Yun Yao cast a spell and tried to fuse them. Half a month later, she separated a wisp of her divine soul and successfully merged it into the blood flame sacred tree. Ji Wushuang cast the spell again and only used half a month to succeed. Ji Tianqing originally wanted Ji Ku and Ji Wuhan to split a wisp of their divine souls and fuse it with the blood flame sacred tree. However, the two of them were still cultivating in seclusion and shouldn't be disturbed, so this matter could only be postponed. Ji Tianqing still had things to deal with, so he left this matter to Yun Yao and Ji Wushuang. After Ji Ku and Ji Wuhan finished cultivating, the two of them would impart the method and experience to help them complete it. Ji Tianqing left the distorted space-time and returned to the secret chamber. He had stayed in the distorted space-time for nearly a year, and 7 days had passed in the outside world. Nangong Buhua had sent messages to the various clans and factions. Now that 7 days had passed, the various factions had thought it through and replied. At this moment, Nangong Buhua personally came to the door of the secret chamber and knocked on the door to call Ji Tianqing to report the situation. Ji Tianqing opened the door of the secret chamber and saw Nangong Buhua standing outside, waiting patiently. Although Nangong Buhua looked calm, Ji Tianqing discovered that there was a hint of anger hidden in his eyes. It was conceivable that the various factions' replies were probably not satisfactory. Young Master Long. Seeing Ji Tianqing come out, Nangong Buhua cupped his hands and bowed. He couldn't help but want to say the result. Ji Tianqing raised his hand to stop him and walked out first. Don't be anxious. Let's talk slowly in the study. Nangong Buhua nodded and followed him to the study. After a while, the two of them entered the study, closed the door and activated the defensive array formation. There was a large number of guards outside the study, and only the two of them were in the study, so they weren't afraid of being eavesdropped on. Ji Tianqing sat on the main seat and Nangong Buhua sat opposite him. He said with an angry tone, Young Master, I sent messages to 17 ancient clans and 36 top factions. Only 4 ancient clans clearly said that they would come to see you as soon as possible to discuss the alliance. The other 13 clans and more than 20 forces were all vague and ambiguous. Their words were full of perfunctory intent. What's more infuriating is that more than a dozen factions were sarcastic toward us. There were even some who firmly supported the Shura God Emperor and wanted to take my message Jade Slip to inform the Meng Shuai and the Imperial Tutor. When he spoke of those factions, Nangong Buhua couldn't hide his anger and almost had a murderous intent. He spoke in a gentle manner, but it was conceivable that the replies of those factions would be very infuriating. It was far beyond his description. And all of this was within Ji Tianqing's expectations, so he wasn't angry. Well, tell me about the situation of those factions. Nangong Buhua snorted and said in a contemptuous tone, the leaders of those factions are all snobbish and spineless. Many years ago, they had been scheming to curry favor with the Meng Shuai and the Imperial Tutor and wanted to join the Shura God Emperor. However, the Meng Shuai and the Imperial Tutor didn't like them and ignored them. Now they are using my message to ask for credit from the Meng Shuai and the Imperial Tutor. Perhaps they will get what they want. I see. Ji Tianqing nodded and said with a smile, everyone has their own ambitions. If they want to join the strong and gain benefits, then let them be. However, you must remember all of them. Because we're going to meet them soon. At that time, none of them can be left out. Although his voice and tone were calm, Nangong Buhua could still hear the murderous intent. Previously, he was worried that even if Ji Tianqing defeated those factions, he would consider the big picture and take them as his subordinates. If that was the case, he and the Nangong clan would have to work with those fence-sitters. Just thinking about it made him feel disgusted. Now with Ji Tianqing's words, he was relieved. At least when the two sides fought, he wouldn't forget to deal with those factions. Just as Nangong Buhua was making up his mind, Ji Tianqing asked again, "Who are the 4 ancient clans that are rushing here as soon as possible?" At the mention of these 4 ancient clans, Nangong Buhua's mood improved. He replied with a smile, "Naturally, they are the clans that have received your favor and supported you the most. There is the War God clan from the Fighting Grotto Heaven, the Lawn clan from the Azure Grotto Heaven, the Phoenix clan from the Divine Phoenix Grotto Heaven, and the Jiang clan from the Divine Attraction Grotto Heaven." Hearing the names of these 4 clans, Ji Tianqing raised his eyebrows and said with a playful smile, "As expected, a friend in need is a friend indeed." Chapter 4074. Only those who firmly support you in the face of life and death are worthy of your trust. This unchanging principle had been proven once again. The Battle God clan of the Fighting Grotto and the Lawn clan of the Azure Grotto would immediately express their support. This was within Ji Tianqing's expectations. However, the Phoenix clan of the Divine Phoenix Grotto and the Jiang clan of the Divine Phoenix Grotto surprised Ji Tianqing. Back then he had helped the Phoenix clan by correcting their inherited secret manual. This debt of gratitude was neither big nor small. If the destruction that Kenshin had caused in the Divine Phoenix Grotto was included, his merits could offset his faults. Ji Tianqing originally thought that the Divine Phoenix Grotto would make all sorts of excuses and observe for a period of time before joining him. He did not expect the Phoenix clan to be the first to support him and be willing to form an alliance with him. As for the Jiang clan of the Divine Phoenix Grotto many years ago before Ji Tianqing left the God world, he had an unpleasant encounter with them. At that time Jiang Tianyi and Jiang Tianqing brought him back to the Jiang clan, which frightened them greatly. One of the brothers was severely injured, while the other was severely punished by the clan leader. The clan leader Jiang Chuyun was also afraid of the Azura God Emperor's power. He was afraid that Jin Shuang would lead an army to destroy the Divine Phoenix Grotto, so he did not save Ji Tianqing. Later, when Ji Tianqing left the Boundless Heaven continent, Jiang Chuyun, Jiang Chusheng, and Jiang Chushao secretly helped him. Ji Tianqing originally thought that someone as cautious and timid as Jiang Chuyun would definitely not be the first to express their support. He did not expect Jiang Chuyun to be so courageous and be the first to express his support. He thought that the words he said to Jiang Chuyun when he left the Boundless Heaven continent must have been effective. Ji Tianqing nodded slightly and said, "In that case I will wait for them here." At this time Nangong Buhua added, "Oh right," another force also replied saying that they will come to see you as soon as possible. "Who else?" Ji Tianqing raised his eyebrows and became interested. "100 Smelting Ancient Sect," Nangong Buhua answered. Ji Tianqing was startled for a moment, then immediately revealed a playful smile. "Su Bailian, this old fellow is really obsessed with the 100 Refining Divine Hammer, he. Nangong Buhua was puzzled. "Young master, is the 100 Refining Divine Hammer in your hands? Wasn't that divine artifact destroyed long ago?" Ji Tianqing smiled and explained, "Of course the 100 Refining Divine Hammer is destroyed, but I know the refining diagram of the 100 Refining Divine Hammer." Nangong Buhua was suddenly enlightened. He chuckled and said, "No wonder Su Bailian is so anxious. Then this time he must have come to negotiate with you and ask for the forging diagram of the Divine Hammer." Ji Tianqing just smiled and didn't say anything. Perhaps Nangong Buhua was still considering that the blueprint of the 100 Refining Divine Hammer was too precious to be given to Su Bailian so easily. Ji Tianqing had to seek more benefits. But in reality Ji Tianqing didn't care too much about it. It was just a supreme-grade divine artifact and he already had a few of them. Now that he had recovered to the peak of the Divine King stage, he still couldn't control the power of the heavenly way. This made him confused and worried. The treasure he wanted the most was no longer a supreme-grade king divine artifact, but something of a higher grade. For example, an emperor-grade divine artifact. Of course, this was just the name he thought of and it was a general statement. The divine artifact that surpassed the supreme-grade king divine artifact was definitely related to the power of the heavenly way, but he still didn't know what it was called. Then the two of them discussed some follow-up matters. Ji Tianqing reminded, "Other than the dozen fence-sitters, send a message to the other clans and forces. Tell them that I said this and this is the last time I inform them. It's still a 1-month deadline and I won't wait after that. Those who come first are allies and also friends. After this deadline, if you want to form an alliance again, you should consider your own strength." These words were somewhat threatening and it was also Ji Tianqing's ultimatum. Nangong Buhua thought for a while and asked uncertainly, "Young master, are you sure you want to say this? We haven't taken action yet, and our forces can't be compared to the Shura God Emperor. Even if we threaten them like this, I'm afraid it won't work and it might even backfire." He was afraid that those clans and forces that were still hesitating and watching would directly submit to the Shura God Emperor after being threatened by Ji Tianxing, or watch coldly from the sidelines. However, Ji Tianxing was not worried at all. He chuckled and said, "If we have an overwhelming advantage, those clans and forces will know what to do even if they are fools. But now it seems that we are at a disadvantage and we can't be compared to the Shura God Emperor's forces. It's under such circumstances that those forces that are willing to form an alliance with us are sincere." Nangong Buhua immediately understood his intention and nodded in agreement. "Young master, I understand. You would rather have a few loyal and trustworthy allies than a bunch of half-hearted partners with ulterior motives. Because you are already confident that you can control the entire situation, right?" Ji Tianxing did not answer and only nodded with a smile. Nangong Buhua was not foolish enough to ask him where his confidence came from. After all, when Ji Tianxing killed Jin Shuang's army, the answer was already in front of everyone's eyes. Those clans and forces that were still hesitating and watching might not believe the rumors and felt that the Nangong clan was deliberately exaggerating Ji Tianxing's strength. However, Nangong Buhua had seen it with his own eyes and naturally understood how powerful Ji Tianxing was. That was the source of his confidence. After the discussion, Ji Tianxing got up and left the study. Next, he returned to the secret room to cultivate. Nangong Buhua patiently waited for the clan leaders and Su Balian to arrive. When the leaders of the 5 forces arrived, Ji Tianxing would come out to meet them. The news of Ji Tianxing killing Jin Shuang's army had already spread throughout the boundless heaven continent. After more than 20 days, the news had already spread to other continents. When Ji Tianxing's 1-month deadline was almost up, the news of Kenshin's return and his desire for revenge had already spread throughout the 5 continents. It was no exaggeration to say that half of the people in the heavenly realm knew about this matter and were discussing it. Even though the Nangong clan had released the news that Ji Tianxing had killed more than 800 experts, including Jin Shuang alone, this news was too shocking. However, this news was so shocking that most people didn't believe it. Those forces in the boundless heaven continent that were wavering and watching in the dark had the same thought. Many people thought that the experts under the Shura God Emperor would be furious and retaliate against the Nangong clan after suffering such losses and humiliation. However, the 1-month deadline was up and the Nangong clan had not been attacked. The Meng Shuai and the Imperial Tutor were also very low-key and did not reveal any plans to the outside world. It seemed that they had swallowed their anger. However, everyone knew that this was impossible. They must be planning how to take revenge and how to kill Kenshin. At the same time, the 5 forces that had expressed their support for Kenshin and the 3 forces that had finally made up their minds arrived at Yenshu's grotto heaven one after another. Chapter 4075. On this day, in Yenshu Cave in the Great Light Palace of the Nangong clan, the 1-month deadline was over and those who were supposed to be here had arrived. As for those who were not here, they had made up their minds to observe the movements of the Kenshin and the Nangong clan, and then react accordingly. The magnificent Great Light Palace was shrouded in a solemn atmosphere. The most elite guards of the Nangong clan were guarding the surroundings of the Great Light Palace. The doors of the palace were closed and only the leaders of the various forces, the elders of the Nangong clan Nangong Buhua, and the others were participating in the meeting in the Great Light Palace. Today Nangong Buhua sat on the left side, while Nangong Nihuang and several elders stood behind him. On the right side of the Great Light Palace, there were 7 divine king experts sitting in a row of seats. They were all dressed luxuriously and had a dignified aura. Behind each of them stood several divine king experts. They were the elders and protectors of the various forces. Although the forces represented by these experts were the first to express their support for the Kenshin. But when Nangong Buhua saw them, he did not feel any admiration or closeness. This was because 3 of them had masked their faces a month ago. Obviously, these experts were not sitting here today to pledge their allegiance to Ji Tianxing, but to negotiate. Whether the 2 sides could form an alliance would depend on the outcome of the negotiation, and whether the experts were satisfied. The hall was completely silent. Ji Tianxing had not arrived yet. Everyone was holding their breaths and patiently waiting for him to show up. 15 minutes later, the doors of the Great Light Palace finally opened. The guards at the door shouted, "Kenshin has arrived." So everyone stood up and turned their heads to look at the door. Everyone's gaze was focused on the handsome young man in the white robe. Looking at him striding into the main hall, many people looked at him with awe along the way. Greetings to Kenshin. Nangong Buhua took the lead and bowed respectfully. The others followed suit and bowed respectfully. There was no doubt that Nangong Buhua had specially arranged for this appearance. Originally, Ji Tianxing had ended his cultivation a day earlier, and could have gathered everyone for a meeting at any time. However, Nangong Buhua insisted on following this procedure to make an appearance. He said that he wanted to frighten the experts. Ji Tianxing didn't care, but he accepted Nangong Buhua's suggestion. So far it seemed that the effect was pretty good. At the very least, the few powerhouses who hadn't seen Ji Tianxing before had complicated expressions when they saw Ji Tianxing. Through the subtle changes in their expressions, it could be seen that their state of mind had changed. Ji Tianxing walked through the spacious hall and stood at the head of the table. He turned around to face the crowd. His gaze swept across everyone's faces and he said, "Everyone is too polite. Please take a seat." After he finished speaking, he took a seat at the head of the table. Only then did everyone else take their seats. Ji Tianxing was not in a hurry to speak. His spokesperson Nangong Buhua spoke first. Nangong Buhua stood up and cupped his hands at the experts of the 8 forces. He said, "Everyone knows why we're gathered here today and what we're going to discuss. Since that's the case, we don't need to waste time saying useless words. Here, I'll start first for everyone's reference." After he finished speaking, he turned to face Ji Tianxing on the throne and said solemnly, "Lord Kenshin, 1,000 years ago the people of the boundless heaven continent were simple and honest, and the people were free. Our 18 ancient clans were divided into regions to protect the peace of the boundless heaven continent. The situation was very peaceful. However, ever since the Shura God Emperor ruled the boundless heaven continent, he used all kinds of methods to suppress the 100 territories and enslaved millions of people. This caused the people of the boundless heaven continent to live in poverty and darkness. We wanted to kill the thief, but we were powerless to resist. We could only endure the humiliation and wait for you to make a comeback. Now that you've finally returned, the Nangong clan is willing to sacrifice everything to follow Lord Kenshin. We want to suppress the tyrant and overthrow the dark rule of the Shura God Emperor. We want to save the entire boundless heaven continent and let millions of people regain their freedom. Lord Kenshin, please allow the 8,000 men of the Nangong clan to join you and serve you loyally." Nangong Buhua's voice was sonorous. After he finished speaking, he even bowed to Ji Tianxing to express his request. Ji Tianxing seemed to be deeply moved. His eyes shone brightly as he nodded solemnly and said, "The Nangong clan leader is righteous and cares about the people of the world. You're really a role model for our generation. The Nangong clan has a compassionate heart and is willing to sacrifice themselves to save the people of the world. This is even more worthy of admiration and respect. How can I refuse such a righteous request that concerns the people of the world? I accept the Nangong clan's allegiance. From now on we'll become allies and help each other with all our hearts." After he finished speaking, Ji Tianxing took out a jade slip and waved his hand, causing it to fly in front of Nangong Buhua. "Nangong clan leader, this is the alliance agreement that I made in advance. You only need to read this alliance agreement out loud and we'll be allies." Nangong Buhua stretched out his hands without hesitation and held the jade slip. With a loud and solemn voice, he read out the alliance agreement in the jade slip. The so-called alliance agreement was actually an oath that Ji Tianxing had prepared in advance. After Ji Tianxing modified it, it was more like an alliance agreement. But in essence, when Nangong Buhua read out the alliance agreement that was close to 1,000 words, he still made an oath to the heavenly Tao. The 37th generation Nangong clan leader, Nangong Buhua, hereby swears that we're willing to form an alliance with Kenshin Long Tian. We'll live and die together and will never betray each other. When Nangong Buhua's loud voice echoed in the Great Hall of Light, the leaders of the 8 forces were stunned. No one had expected things to develop like this. The so-called negotiation and discussion of the alliance was actually so simple and crude. There was a lot of swearing to the heavens, asking the heavenly Tao to bear witness and so on. Before they came, the leaders of the few forces were still thinking about how to fight for benefits and how to bargain with Ji Tianxing. Now it seemed that there was no need for that. Without a doubt, this was a scene that Nangong Buhua and Ji Tianxing had discussed in advance and insisted on adding. Ji Tianxing had originally planned to negotiate with the 8 forces directly and allow them to make some requests and conditions. As long as it was not too overboard, he could consider and negotiate. However, Nangong Buhua wanted to take the lead to speak and set an example for the 8 forces to set the tone for this meeting. That was because he was worried that the 8 forces would ask for too much and ruin the negotiation. Therefore there was this scene. After 100 breaths, when Nangong Buhua finished reading the alliance agreement, a wisp of Dao runes appeared above his head and his body was glowing with golden light. In the sky above the Great Hall of Light, there were continuous rumbles of thunder. Obviously, the oath to the heavenly Dao had been completed, which was why such a phenomenon had appeared. The leaders of the various forces looked at Nangong Buhua in a different light. A few experts fidgeted uneasily and looked embarrassed. Chapter 4076. Isn't this too cruel? Is Nangong Buhua crazy? Is that an alliance? He's swearing to God. Oh my God. The Nangong clan won't talk about any conditions or benefits, and they'll be loyal to Kenshin unconditionally? Damn Nangong Buhua, isn't he too much? Isn't he being disloyal to us? I understand now. Nangong Buhua must have discussed this with Kenshin. He's purposely making things difficult for us. He's highly regarded by Kenshin. Of course he can put on a show. Even if he doesn't talk about any conditions, Kenshin won't mistreat him. The leaders of the various forces looked at each other and secretly discussed with each other through voice transmission. They felt very indignant in their hearts. However, no one was stupid enough to expose Nangong Buhua, nor would they leave because of this. They all wanted to see how Nangong Buhua and Kenshin were going to act. As expected, when Nangong Buhua finished swearing, the heavenly oath was established. Ji Tianxing seemed to be moved. He stood up and looked at Nangong Buhua with sincerity. Family head Nangong, I absolutely believe in your sincerity. Look, even God is moved by you. Such deep friendship, I will definitely remember it in my heart and never forget it. Then he looked at the people in the hall and solemnly announced, I hereby announce that I'm officially forming an alliance with the Nangong clan. From now on we'll help each other and live and die together. When the operation is successful, I'll give the Raging Flame region to Nangong Buhua, and the Nangong clan will govern it. In addition, I'll allow the Nangong clan to develop their forces and industries in the surrounding 10 regions. I believe that under the leadership of Nangong Buhua, the Nangong clan will grow stronger and more prosperous. This was Ji Tianxing's public promise to the Nangong clan as a reward. Of course, the Nangong clan would receive more than this. After hearing this, Nangong Buhua was a little excited. He quickly bowed and thanked Ji Tianxing. On behalf of the Nangong clan, Nangong Buhua thanks Kenshin for his kindness. When he finished, Nangong Nihuang and the other elders also bowed and thanked him. The leaders of the other forces were dumbfounded once again. They were all dumbfounded and their expressions were particularly interesting. That's it? He's bought the Nangong clan over with such a small reward. Is he fooling us? If the operation succeeds, the entire boundless heaven continent will belong to the Sword God, but he only rewarded the Nangong clan with the Raging Flame region? Nangong Buhua's over the Nangong clan, the clan T that clant the Nangong clan to reward. God, st-88, teet. I thought the Kenshin would have at least rewarded the Nangong clan with 20 territories since the Kenshin trusted the Nangong clan so much. Ji Tianxing's decision was very different from what the leaders had expected. They couldn't believe it and were very disappointed. At this moment, the leaders could already imagine how they would be treated. No matter how they negotiated, they wouldn't be able to reach their expectations. Even if the Kenshin treated them like the Nangong clan, they wouldn't be interested in such a small reward. The leaders couldn't sit still. They were hesitating whether they should find an excuse to leave Yanshu's paradise as soon as possible. The alliance of the Nangong clan was completed. Ji Tianxing's gaze fell on the leaders on the right side of the hall. Even though he didn't say anything, his intention was clear. If the leaders were smart, they would have stood up and expressed their intention to form an alliance with the Kenshin. That way the alliance ceremony could proceed smoothly. However, the few patriarchs and sect masters pretended not to see Ji Tianxing's expression and remained silent. No one was willing to stand up first. No one was like Nangong Buhua, who was unconditionally loyal to Ji Tianxing. Everyone was silent and the atmosphere in the hall became more and more awkward. Nangong Buhua was a little anxious and couldn't help but remind them, "Leaders, you've come all the way here to participate in this grand event. We don't have much time. Let's not delay the important matters. Especially the two clan leaders who are of virtue and prestige. Even I have to call you seniors. At this time, shouldn't you show the spirit of a senior and set an example?" This was what it meant to drive a duck to a perch. As Nangong Buhua finished speaking, everyone looked at Lan Wuji and the leader of the Divine Phoenix clan. After all, these two were recognized as seniors and had more than 28,000 years of cultivation. Under everyone's gaze, Lan Wuji and the leader of the Divine Phoenix clan felt awkward and couldn't keep quiet anymore. Even if they were unwilling, they couldn't show it too much. They didn't want to leave a bad impression on Kenshin and ruin everything. They were just depressed and resisted Nangong Buhua even more. As for the other patriarchs and sect masters, they secretly heaved a sigh of relief, waiting to see how the two of them would react. Ji Tianxing looked at the leader of the Divine Phoenix clan on the right. The leader of the Divine Phoenix clan couldn't avoid him. He could only stand up and bow to Ji Tianxing. He didn't talk about the alliance and asked, "Young Master Long Tian, we haven't seen each other for many years. Is Bai Feng doing well?" Everyone was stunned for a moment before they realized that the Divine Phoenix clan had a God King expert who had followed Kenshin for many years. In that case, the Divine Phoenix clan had already placed a bet on Kenshin. Ji Tianxing nodded and said, "Bai Feng has been traveling with me all these years and has experienced more than 10 battles. She's safe and her strength has increased after training. Since I've met the leader of the Divine Phoenix clan today, I should let Bai Feng meet you to prevent the Divine Phoenix clan from worrying." After saying that, he used his divine consciousness to wake up Bai Feng, who was in the distorted space-time. Then he waved his hand and shot out a white light to activate the 9 Heavens 10 Absolutes Tower. Swoosh! With a flash of white light, Bai Feng appeared in the radiant hall. Ji Tianxing had explained the situation to him in advance, so he wasn't surprised to see so many God Kings sitting in the hall. Bai Feng, disciple of the Divine Phoenix clan, greets seniors and fellow Daoists. Bai Feng, who was dressed in white and looked cold and serious, bowed to the God Kings in the hall. Then he walked to the leader of the Divine Phoenix clan and bowed respectfully. "Greetings to the clan leader, the Great Guardian, and the 2 elders." After so many years, Bai Feng was happy and excited to finally meet the members of the Divine Phoenix clan. However, he looked calm and didn't lose his composure. He already had the dignified bearing of a leader. The leader of the Divine Phoenix clan, the Great Guardian, and the 2 elders observed carefully and found that Bai Feng had already broken through to the 8th level of the Divine King realm. This discovery caused everyone to be filled with pleasant surprise. Chapter 4077. Everyone knew that it was extremely difficult for a God King expert to raise one level, and it would usually take a few hundred or a few thousand years. Bai Feng had only reached the 7th level of the God King realm for 300 plus years. The Phoenix clan's experts all thought that he would need at least 1,000 years before he could reach the 8th stage realm. They had not expected that he had already broken through after not seeing him for several decades. It was imaginable how much benefits he had gained from following Kenshin all these years. The Great Guardian and the 2 elders were curious and envious at the same time. But now was not the time to chat and reminisce about the past. They could only suppress their curiosity as they waited for the clan leader and Bai Feng to discuss official matters. Divine Phoenix clan leader looked at Bai Feng and sent a voice transmission. "Bai Feng, tell us the truth. What is Kenshin's character? Is he trustworthy and worthy of following? Today the guardians and elders are all here. If you don't wish to follow Kenshin, you can follow us back to the Phoenix clan now." Their voice transmission conversation would not be heard by anyone else. So Divine Phoenix clan leader did not beat around the bush and went straight to the point. Bai Feng was stunned, apparently not expecting the clan leader to be so direct. After muttering to himself for a moment and seriously considering it, he sent a voice transmission to the clan leader and said in a solemn tone, "Although I have followed Kenshin in name these few years and have no choice but to be loyal to him, but in actual fact he has always treated me as a friend. Of course, not only me, there are many people under him and they can all be considered as his friends. He would never ask anyone to sacrifice or contribute for him. Instead, he always protects and protects everyone. With such friends and allies, we can completely trust him. Moreover, clan leader. I don't intend to return to the Phoenix clan. I want to continue following Kenshin and help him complete that earth-shattering feat. Bai Feng's voice was low, but his tone was firm and unquestionable. Divine Phoenix clan leader could hear his determination and knew that he had finally found a goal to fight for. Kenshin could actually influence the people around him to fight for his goal willingly, even if they had to sacrifice their lives. It was imaginable how terrifying was Kenshin's charisma. Divine Phoenix clan leader fell silent as he looked at Bai Feng with a complicated expression, not knowing what to say. At this moment, Bai Feng bowed to him and did not say anything else. She walked towards the Great Guardian and the two elders. In the past, he had a very close relationship with the two elders. After not seeing them for so many years, of course he had to greet them and catch up. The leader of the Divine Phoenix tribe thought for a moment before clasping his fists at Ji Tianxing. He solemnly said, "Young Master Long Tian, after careful consideration, I have decided to ally with you." After that, he was about to read out the agreement of the alliance to show his sincerity. This way he could avoid the awkwardness. If he had to swear to the heavens like Nangong Buhua, it would be really embarrassing. Moreover, after swearing to the heavens, the heavenly Tao would sense it, so the phoenixes would not dare to violate the oath easily. That was equivalent to putting shackles on the phoenixes. They would be completely passive and would no longer have a chance to bargain. However, before the Divine Phoenix clan leader could read the agreement, Ji Tianxing waved his hand and a beam of white light landed in front of him. Within the white light was a jade slip, which recorded the oath of the heavenly Tao that had been changed into a covenant. Since the Divine Phoenix clan leader has the sincerity to form an alliance, everyone should be treated equally. Only then will it be fair. What do you think? Ji Tianxing looked at the Divine Phoenix clan leader with a smile. His tone was casual, but there was a hint of irrefutability in it. The Divine Phoenix clan leader frowned. His pupils constricted and he was a little unhappy. However, since things had come to this, he could not back down. If he insisted on resisting, the situation would become even worse. The other clan leaders and sect masters were all looking at him expectantly, waiting for him to make a decision. After hesitating for a while, the Divine Phoenix clan leader chose to believe Bai Feng. He gritted his teeth and made up his mind. He picked up the jade slip and read out the agreement that Ji Tianxing had made in a low voice according to the contents inside. This agreement was basically the same as what Nangong Buhua had read out. It was also close to 1,000 words long, and it sounded like all kinds of restrictions and restrictions. After the Divine Phoenix clan leader finished reading the agreement, the phoenixes were considered to have been trapped by Ji Tianxing. They would not dare to betray him or go against him, unless the phoenixes were not afraid of being punished by the heavenly Tao. Boom, boom. After the Divine Phoenix clan leader finished reading the agreement, thunder rumbled in the sky above the light palace. A wisp of Tao runes appeared above his head, and his whole body was covered in a layer of golden light. Everyone in the palace saw this scene and felt the vast power of the heavenly Tao. They were all curious and shocked. Ji Tianxing kept saying that the Divine Phoenix clan leader's sincerity had moved the heavens. However, the Divine Kings present all knew that things were definitely not that simple. Nangong Buhua and the Divine Phoenix clan leader swore to the heavens. The content of the oath was recognized by the heavenly Tao, and it became a heavenly Tao oath. Whoever dared to go against the oath would have to consider whether they could withstand the punishment of the heavenly Tao. At that thought, the clan leaders and sect masters' eyes dimmed. They were nervous and hesitant. After the heavenly Tao oath's phenomenon ended, the Divine Phoenix clan leader knew that the outcome was set. There was no turning back. He felt as if a heavy burden had been lifted off his shoulders, and he let out a long sigh. Ji Tianxing continued his previous performance. He seemed to be very touched as he said, "The Divine Phoenix clan leader's sincerity in forming an alliance with me has moved the heavens and attracted the heavenly Tao to witness it. It's really commendable. I agree to form an alliance with the Phoenix clan. From now on we will help each other and live and die together. When we succeed in the future, the Fuchuan region will be ruled by the Phoenix clan. The Phoenix clan will also be able to develop their forces and industries in the surrounding 10 regions." There was no surprise or joy in this outcome. The benefits that the Phoenix clan received were exactly the same as the Nangong clan. The Divine Phoenix clan leader forced a smile and thanked Ji Tianxing. Then he returned to his seat and did not say anything else. It was obvious that the old man's expression was gloomy. He simply closed his eyes and rested. The Phoenix clan's alliance was successful. Next was the Lan clan's turn. Lan Wuji knew that he could not change the outcome. However, he could not just leave. He could only accept his fate. He stood up decisively and expressed his willingness to form an alliance. Then he read out the agreement that Ji Tianxing had taken out. His swift and decisive actions caused everyone to have a whole new level of respect for him. A smile also appeared on Ji Tianxing's face. After Lan Wuji read out the oath, there was another scene of thunder and Dao runes. Ji Tianxing acted as usual. He promised the Lan clan the same benefits as the Nangong clan and the Phoenix clan. Lan Wuji smiled and thanked him. Then he handed the jade slip to Jiang Qiyun, who was beside him. Jiang Qiyun looked at the jade slip in front of him and the smiling and amiable Lan Wuji. He was so angry that his nose almost went crooked. The Divine Phoenix clan leader and Lan Wuji were respected seniors. They could only accept it when Nangong Buhua forced them to do so. However, it was not certain who would be the next to read out the alliance agreement. Now Lan Wuji handed it to him directly. He could not accept it, but he could not refuse it either. However, when Lan Wuji saw his hesitation, he smiled and said, "Clan leader Jiang, it's your turn. Don't worry. Everyone's alliance agreement is the same. Just read it." Chapter 4078. I.F***CK. Hearing Lan Wuji's words, Jiang Qiyun's face almost turned black. Despicable old fox. Jiang Qiyun cursed in his heart. He could only brace himself and accept the jade slip. Back then, before Ji Tianxing left the divine world, something unpleasant had happened in the Jiang clan. At that time, Jiang Qiyun was afraid of Jin Shuang and her army, so he had no choice but to offend Ji Tianxing. But since then he swore to himself that he would never offend Ji Tianxing again. He also couldn't give Ji Tianxing a bad impression. Otherwise he would ruin the relationship between Kenshin and the Jiang clan. Therefore he took the jade slip, took a deep breath and began to read the alliance agreement. The contents of the alliance agreement didn't change much. After reading it, thunder rumbled and Daoist rhymes appeared. His whole body was covered in golden light. Those in the know knew that it was a heavenly oath. Those who didn't know would think that he was going to ascend after being rewarded by the heavens. When the Daoist rhymes dissipated and the thunder stopped, the alliance agreement between the Jiang clan and Ji Tianxing was completed. As usual, Ji Tianxing was touched, and promised the Jiang clan the same benefits. He still controlled a region and allowed them to develop their forces in the surrounding 10 regions. After the Jiang clan's matter was settled, Jiang Qiyun looked at the jade slip in his hand and then at the Battle God clan's leader. It was unknown whether it was because Jiang Qiyun had a high EQ and didn't want to offend others. Or was it because the Battle God clan's leader's 6-meter-tall body was as majestic as an iron tower and was too oppressive? In short, Jiang Qiyun returned the jade slip to Ji Tianxing and didn't hand it to the Battle God clan's leader. But what everyone didn't expect was that when the jade slip flew to Ji Tianxing, the Battle God clan's leader waved his hand and shot out a golden light, taking the jade slip. He held the jade slip in his hand and didn't hurry to read the alliance agreement. Instead he said to Ji Tianxing, "Brother Long Tian, do you still remember our agreement?" Ji Tianxing smiled and nodded. He asked, "Brother Zhan is referring to having me spar with the brothers from the War God clan?" The Battle God clan leader smiled and explained, "It's good that Brother Long still remembers. However, it can't be considered a spar. I just hope that when you are free you can give us some pointers." Ji Tianxing's smile was still gentle as he said, "No problem. It's a good thing for everyone to learn from each other and improve." Seeing that he had agreed, the War God clan leader no longer had any doubts. He immediately picked up the jade slip and read out the alliance agreement. Originally, this was a treaty that would make all the patriarchs and sect masters depressed. Normally, as they read it, their expressions would become serious and their moods would become very sullen. However, the War God clan patriarch's thunderous voice actually sounded impassioned and hot-blooded, as if he was about to die heroically. As his body lit up with golden light, Daoist rhymes appeared above his head. When the heavenly thunder rumbled in the sky, his aura reached its peak. The golden armor on his body shone brightly. That scene, that aura, it was as if he was about to go into battle to kill the enemy. The patriarchs and sect masters who had yet to read out the alliance agreement looked at each other in dismay. They communicated privately and almost cursed out loud. These old fellows, each one is more shrewd than the other. That's right. They are all fellows who sail according to the wind. Previously they were still thinking about how to negotiate, but in the end they admitted defeat faster than anyone else. Each one of them is really unique. When it's our turn, if we don't do something new, I'm afraid we won't be able to leave a deep impression on the Kenshin. Today, of the 8 forces that came to the Radiant Palace, the Feng clan, the Lan clan, the Jiang clan, and the War God clan had already expressed their stance and formed an alliance with the Kenshin. Only the 100 Refinement Ancient Sect, the Shimi Paradise, the Raging Flame Paradise, and the Xia clan had yet to express their stance. Unfortunately, the 4 patriarchs and sect masters were seated next to the War God clan's patriarch. As for the War God clan leader, he had a valiant personality and was never afraid of offending others. He was a true battle maniac. After Ji Tianxing promised the War God clan benefits in front of everyone, the War God clan leader threw the jade slip to the Yuchi clan leader beside him. The Yuchi clan occupied the Raging Flame Grotto within the Raging Wind region. The dark-skinned and muscular Yuchi clan leader held the jade slip with an aggrieved expression. He looked at the Iron Tower like War God clan leader and originally wanted to grumble a little, but he still held it in. Things had already developed to such a stage, and if they were to incur enmity with the War God clan and make the Kenshin see them in a different light, that wasn't a wise move. Hence, Yuchi clan leader could only bear with his grievances as he read out the alliance agreement in a lively voice. The originally dull and rigid alliance agreement content was read out in cadence by that emotional voice of his, rising and falling, which made one's blood boil. The few clan leaders and many strong practitioners were all smiling as they looked at him. Their expressions and gazes were somewhat amused. The few forces who had already formed an alliance were all thinking in their hearts that they had all been trapped, so don't even think of escaping. The 3 forces who had not read out the alliance agreement were muttering in their hearts. Old fellow, you're putting in so much effort, don't you feel that you're exaggerating? You're at least the Yuchi clan leader, a 9th stage realm god king expert. Where's your face? Most importantly, you've already displayed everything that you can, so what should we do? Half a quarter of an hour later, Yuchi clan leader finished reading out the alliance agreement and obtained Heavenly Dao's verification. Ji Tianxing also promised benefits in front of everyone. There weren't any surprises and the treatment was the same as the previous few forces. Yuchi clan leader was still hesitating whether to return the jade token to Ji Tianxing or pass it to Cave Lord Shimi, who was beside him. Cave Lord Shimi was naturally the owner of Shimi Grotto Heaven. This force originated from ancient times and was most adept at scouting for information, possessing one of the top intelligence forces in the Boundless Heaven continent. Immediately following that, something that made everyone surprised happened. Yuchi clan leader had yet to decide who to pass the jade token to when Cave Lord Shimi stood up and spoke out clearly. There's no need for the jade token. Earlier I heard the few clan leaders read it out and this seat has already memorized it. After that he started to read out the alliance agreement, which was over 1,000 words based on his memory. Many god kings in the main hall were shocked. There's such a thing? Impressive, impressive. Sure enough, it's unique and unique. You bastards, you've really racked your brains and put in a lot of effort. Walking the path of others and leaving them with no way out? It's over, we have one less path left. We have to quickly think of a way. The few forces that had already formed an alliance were all smiling as they watched the show and commented. The 2 forces that had yet to form an alliance were becoming more and more anxious as they racked their brains to think of a new idea. Not long after, Cave Lord Shimi finished reading the alliance agreement. There were close to 1,000 words of content and not a single word was missing. The few elders and protectors of Shimi Grotto Heaven clapped their hands with pride. The people of 100 Refinement Ancient Sect and Xia clan were even more dumbfounded, and their expressions became even weirder. What was there to applaud and be proud of in such a humiliating and sullen way of forming an alliance? Weren't they all full of confidence and arrogance before coming here, insisting on scraping off a few layers of Kenshin's skin? Why were all of them so shameless now? Chapter 4079. Cave Lord Shimi's body emitted a golden light, and a Dao rhythm appeared above his head. Ji Tianxing was too lazy to continue acting. He did not even feel touched, and directly promised to give Shimi Eden benefits. After it ended, only the 100 Refinement Ancient Sect and the Xia clan remained. Everyone's gaze landed on Su Bailian and Xia clan head. Everyone wanted to see who would be the first to announce the alliance agreement. In the end, Su Bailian's skin was thick enough. While Xia clan head was still hesitating, he stood up. He looked at Ji Tianxing and asked, "Kenshin, you haven't forgotten our previous agreement, right?" Once he said that, Xia clan head quivered. He looked at Su Bailian with a gaze filled with anger and jealousy. He thought in his heart, "Damn it. You old foxes, when did you contact Kenshin beforehand and even discuss the conditions? Before today I have never even met Kenshin. I didn't even discuss any additional conditions. Isn't this a huge loss?" Ji Tianxing nodded at Su Bailian and said calmly, "After today's alliance I can immediately fulfill our previous agreement." Hearing such a sincere reply, Su Bailian was completely relieved. He no longer hesitated. He picked up the jade letter and started reading the alliance agreement. Not long after, he finished reading the alliance agreement and officially formed an alliance with Ji Tianxing. After the heaven and earth anomaly ended, Ji Tianxing also promised in front of everyone that he would reward the 100 Refinement Ancient Sect with a piece of land and allow them to develop their forces in the surrounding 10 regions. The 100 Refinement Ancient Sect had also successfully formed an alliance. Only the Xia clan was left in the hall, becoming the focus of everyone. Everyone understood that since the situation had developed to this stage, Kenshin's power had already been established. The Xia clan could not resist and could only agree. At this point, if Xia clan head still wanted to discuss any conditions, he would only be humiliating himself. Furthermore, he had to think of something new. If he could not think of any good ideas, directly reading the alliance agreement would be too boring. Everyone had such thoughts as they quietly looked at Xia clan head, waiting to see how he would act. To everyone's surprise, clan leader Xia gave them a pleasant surprise. He held the jade slip in his hand, but he was not in a hurry to read the treaty. Instead he said to Ji Tianxing, "Kenshin, you went to the Xia clan more than 1,000 years ago. During that exchange of pointers, my Xia clan's disciples were not as skilled as others and many of them were injured. Since then there has been no interaction between us. Logically speaking, you don't owe the Xia clan a debt of gratitude, but this time when you raised your arm and called for help, this seat still rushed over to support you. In my opinion, you should show some kind of reaction no matter how you look at it. Only then will I be able to appease my clansmen, especially those who were injured by you." No one would have thought that Xia clan head would be so stubborn at the last moment and make a request to Ji Tianxing. Even though Xia clan leader had already softened his tone and lowered his demands. However, in the eyes of many experts, this was very unwise. If Ji Tianxing rejected him, then the Xia clan would be in an awkward position. Fortunately, Ji Tianxing did not get angry, nor did he reject him in front of everyone. He asked calmly, "What request does clan leader Xia have? If it's not too excessive, this seat can consider it." Seeing that he had relented, clan leader Xia was obviously relieved. The other leaders who had already formed an alliance felt unbalanced. They envied clan leader Xia for daring to say this, but they were also worried that the Xia clan would gain more benefits because of this. Clan leader Xia pondered for a moment, then discussed with the protectors and elders. Only then did he say, "Kenshin, our Xia clan is located in a remote corner of the Dong'an region. That region is relatively barren and cultivation resources are scarce. However, the neighboring Zhou Xian region has more abundant cultivation resources. Therefore, we hope that after we complete our mission we can control the Dong'an region and Zhou Xian region." Clan leader Xia was very smart. He did not open his mouth like a lion and ask for 7 or 8 regions like he had imagined. He only wanted one of the surrounding regions. It was not too excessive and he could still gain enough benefits. However, before he could finish speaking, he was interrupted by Ji Tianxing. "Clan leader Xia, your request is a bit excessive." Ji Tianxing raised his hand and pointed at Nangong Buhua Lan Wuji, and the clan leader of the Divine Phoenix clan. He said in a dignified tone, "Today this seat will treat all the clans and sects equally. There will be no discrimination. This seat will also promise everyone the same benefits, including the Nangong clan. If this seat is extra generous and gives the Xia clan an extra region, what will these friends of the clans and sects think?" Nangong Buhua, Nangong Nihuang, and the others were the first to express their agreement. "That's right. Young Master Long Tian has always been fair and just. I hope that clan leader Xia will not break the rules. Xia clan leader, may I take the liberty to say something? If everyone is like you and asks for more territory from the sword god, how would the sword god deal with it? Can you still guarantee fairness? I'm afraid that no matter how the Kenshin distributes the territories, everyone will have resentment in their hearts. Furthermore, we have just formed an alliance today and have to face countless dangers and killings. We haven't achieved anything yet we are asking for territories here. I'm afraid it's not appropriate, right? After the people of the Nangong clan finished speaking, the clan leader of the Divine Phoenix clan, Lan Wuji, and Su Bailian also expressed their opinions. Everyone was treated the same, so of course, they would not agree to the Xia clan getting an extra region. The Xia clan leader was speechless and his expression turned ugly. The protectors and elders of the Xia clan were also enraged. They felt ashamed and resentful. Fortunately, Ji Tianxing spoke in time and gave the Xia clan a way out. Clan leader Xia, I hope you can understand that this seat is giving everyone the same treatment and maintaining fairness. This is for everyone's good. On top of that, I'm afraid you, the patriarchs and the sect leaders are all confused. There are clearly hundreds of regions in the Boundless Heaven continent. After we overthrow the rule of the Azura God Emperor, this seat will be able to control all the regions. Under such circumstances, it's not a problem to give each force 3 to 5 regions. Why is this seat so stingy and only give each force 1 region? Without a doubt, this was a question that all the forces were very concerned about. Even Nangong Buhua had doubts in his heart. It was just that he chose to believe in Ji Tianxing and never asked. Everyone looked at Ji Tianxing with burning eyes, waiting for an answer. Ji Tianxing explained with a smile. The reason why we opposed Emperor God Xiao Luo and formed an alliance to overthrow him was because he was able to cover the sky with one hand and monopolize the power, causing the people of the Boundless Heaven continent to suffer. Our goal is to return peace to the Boundless Heaven continent and restore the freedom of the people so that all living beings can live and work in peace. If each force can be given several regions, their power will definitely increase exponentially. At that time, it will definitely form a state of fragmentation. After a long time, it will be inevitable that there will be friction and conflicts. If a war were to break out, the common people would suffer again. Even if we overthrow the rule of the Azura God Emperor, we will also bring war. What's the point of our alliance then? Chapter 40-80. The divine kings in the hall were all smart people. When Ji Tianxing said it, everyone understood. He wanted to strictly control the power of the various clans and not allow the situation of the heroes separating themselves to appear. Only then could he ensure the peace of the Boundless Heaven continent. Some people agreed with this, but there were also people who objected to it. Su Bailian frowned and asked, Kenshin, when the time comes, you'll be the overlord of the Boundless Heaven continent. With you overseeing this place, the various clans and top forces won't dare to wantonly start a war, right? This question asked the hearts of many powerhouses. Many people nodded in agreement. Ji Tianxing smiled and explained, I've long guessed that you all would think this way. But do you all think that my goal is only to save the Boundless Heaven continent? There's also the Reincarnation Island, Firmament, Qinkuan, and the Primal Chaos continent. They're all under the dark rule of the 4 great god emperors. The people of those 4 continents also yearn for light and freedom. Hearing this, everyone was shocked. They all revealed expressions of disbelief. Some people even sucked in a cold breath. Very clearly, Ji Tianxing was saying that not only did he want to save the Boundless Heaven continent, but he also wanted to save the entire divine realm. He wanted to overthrow the rule of the 5 great god emperors and completely start a war with the 5 great god emperors. What kind of breadth of mind and boldness was this? Naturally, if Ji Tianxing saved the 5 continents and controlled the entire divine realm, he would be too busy. There were still many things to do. It was simply impossible for him to oversee the Boundless Heaven continent. In this way, it made sense for him to deliberately suppress the power of the various clans. The few clan leaders and sect masters were silent. Clan leader Xia was also speechless. He still felt a little sullen. He wanted to fight for more benefits for the Xia clan, but he did not know what to say. Fortunately, Ji Tianxing was more understanding and did not let clan leader Xia be embarrassed for too long. He continued, Originally, we've only taken the first step in the plan to get rid of the rebels. I didn't want to tell everyone about this so early and so hastily. But since everyone has asked here, there's no harm in letting you know in advance. Clan leader Xia, I can't fulfill the conditions you requested. However, this seat can help the Xia clan by correcting their cultivation techniques and secret manuals. I can also give pointers to a few promising talents. What do you think? If it were any other godly king who said that he wanted to help the Xia clan revise their secret scriptures, the Xia clan would definitely suspect that the other party was trying to steal the Xia clan's inherited cultivation technique. However, none of the experts present would doubt Ji Tianxing's words. After all, the various factions did not produce a peak divine king. Kenshin was a peak divine king 1,000 years ago. Now he had returned to the peak. Would he still fancy those low-level cultivation method manuals? From another point of view, Kenshin helping the Xia clan revise their cultivation techniques was definitely a huge profit for the Xia clan. What's more, Kenshin had even promised to give pointers to the Xia clan's talents. Everyone present knew that anyone who could receive Kenshin's personal guidance, as long as they weren't a blockhead, would soar to the sky. For example, Bai Feng of the Phoenix clan was a living example. Didn't you see that Bai Feng was already dead set on following Kenshin? She didn't even want to return to the divine Phoenix Grotto heaven? Although Ji Tianxing's promise was very beneficial to the Xia clan, it wasn't too unreasonable. The other 7 factions wouldn't be jealous either. It was the best of both worlds. The Xia clan head also knew how to act appropriately. He accepted Ji Tianxing's promise and bowed to express his gratitude. Next he took out the jade letter and read the alliance agreement in front of everyone. After he finished reading the alliance agreement, the contents of the oath were approved by the heavenly Dao. His entire body lit up with golden light. Dao rhythms appeared above his head. Thunder boomed above the divine light palace. Ji Tianxing followed the procedure and made a promise in front of everyone. He would reward the Xia clan with a piece of land and allow the Xia clan to develop their forces and businesses in the surrounding 10 regions. At this point, the 9 factions including the Nangong clan had formed an alliance with Ji Tianxing. Ji Tianxing, the 9 clan heads and the sect head bowed and thanked each other. They all called each other brothers and chatted with each other. No matter how many thoughts they had previously, they all smiled and wiped away their enmity. They appeared to be very harmonious and united. Next, everyone began to discuss the specific plan of action. The leader of the rebel alliance was naturally Ji Tianxing. The deputy leader was, of course, Nangong Buhua. Ji Tianxing had the authority to control and deploy the 9 factions. He also had the obligation to protect the 9 factions from being destroyed. However, the specific plan of action and where to start dealing with the powerhouses under the Azura God Emperor was still up for discussion. After an hour of discussion, the leaders of the few factions all agreed that it was a good choice to start from the Yenshu Grotto heaven. Each faction would use half a month to bring their own elites, at least 1,000-strong army, to the Yenshu Grotto heaven. Then Ji Tianxing would lead everyone to take the initiative to sweep through the various regions and eliminate the forces under the Azura God Emperor. Ji Tianxing and Nangong Buhua didn't express their opinions. In fact, they didn't agree with everyone's suggestion. This was because they both knew that each faction didn't want to be alone. They would rather stay together for protection. However, this wasn't efficient at all. As long as the Meng Shuai and the imperial tutor weren't stupid, they could easily come up with a countermeasure. Seeing that the 6 clan leaders and suzerain had reached a consensus, only the divine Phoenix clan leader and Lan Wuji remained silent and didn't express their opinions. According to the principle of majority rule, they naturally had to listen to the 6 clan leaders and suzerain's suggestion and act together. However, in this alliance Ji Tianxing was the leader. He had the absolute right to speak. There were no principles or rules. Seeing that everyone was still discussing, Ji Tianxing raised his hand to signal for everyone to be quiet. He said in a dignified tone, "Although it's safe to act together and our forces are concentrated, it's inefficient. We need to defeat the Meng Shuai and the imperial tutor as soon as possible. If we drag this out and give them enough time to plan, it'll be more difficult for us to act. Therefore I've decided to split into 2 groups. One group will be led by me, followed by the Phoenix clan, the 100 Smelting Ancient sect and the Yuchi clan. The other group will be led by Nangong Buhua, followed by the Lan clan, the Battle God clan, the Xia clan, the Shimi Grotto heaven and the Jiang clan." Hearing Ji Tianxing's arrangement, the leaders of the 8 factions were confused. Ji Tianxing was only leading 3 clans, but Nangong Buhua was leading 4 clans and the 100 Smelting Ancient sect. Everyone frowned and pondered. What was his intention? Did he think that he was strong enough to take on the other 5 clans and the 100 smelting ancient sect with only 3 clans? Furthermore, the Lan clan, the Battle God clan and the Jiang clan were obviously loyal to him, but he arranged for them to be under Nangong Buhua's command. Was he trying to stabilize the situation so that Nangong Buhua wouldn't be able to control them? After all, the Lan clan, the Battle God clan, and the Jiang clan wouldn't make things difficult for Nangong Buhua because of him. Thinking of this, the leaders of the various factions were relieved. Then Nangong Buhua asked in a serious tone, "Alliance leader, other than eliminating the forces under the Azura God Emperor, do we need to attack the leaders of the various regions?" Chapter 4081. Nangong Buhua's question was also the concern of the clan leaders and sect masters. Ji Tianxing already had an answer in his heart and answered without hesitation, "If those territorial masters obstruct or resist, we will try our best to capture them. There is no way to kill them. If those territorial masters know what's good for them, there is no need to make things difficult for them. After all, after the Azura God Emperor's rule is overthrown, the 100 territories still need those territorial masters to maintain peace and stability." His answer laid out the bottom line and the criteria for the operation of quelling rebels. Nangong Buhua and the 8 leaders cupped their fists and bowed, acknowledging the order. The meeting was about to come to an end. The leaders of the 8 forces stayed behind and sent messages back to their respective clans and sects to gather their elite disciples at the Yenshu Grotto Heaven. Ji Tianxing had also set a rule for the gathering of people to prevent them from being selfish and unwilling to put in more effort. Each force had to gather at least 1,000 people, of which there should be no less than 20 divine kings and 200 upper divine lords. This was a high requirement, but it was not too harsh. At least the 8 forces and the Nangong clan all met this requirement. Of course, if the 9 forces met this requirement, there would still be a small number of divine kings and upper divine lords left to guard their grotto heavens. Seeing that the matter was settled, everyone was about to disperse and leave the Great Light Hall. At this moment, a guard's voice came from outside the Great Light Hall, and the door opened with a creaking sound. A silver-armored messenger guard held a jade slip with a solemn expression and quickly stepped into the Great Light Hall, heading straight for Ji Tianxing. Suddenly, the atmosphere in the Great Light Hall became heavy. Everyone's eyes were focused on the messenger guard, and a bad premonition arose in their hearts. As expected, the messenger guard came to the steps of the throne and knelt on one knee, reporting to Ji Tianxing, "Alliance Master, I have just received a message from the front. Please take a look." This person was the captain of the guards, and he was very clever. Seeing that the experts of the various forces were present, he did not directly explain what had happened. The leaders of the 8 forces were somewhat displeased, but there was nothing wrong with that. They only hoped that after Ji Tianxing looked at the information in the jade strip, he would let them know about it. Unexpectedly, Ji Tianxing didn't take the communication jade slip. He said calmly, "Today we are all allies, allies worthy of trust and reliance." As long as it was military news and did not involve personal secrets, there was no harm in speaking directly. After all, timely communication and discussion is the foundation of trust. The messenger guard was startled for a moment, and then a look of admiration appeared in his eyes. Nangong Buhua was the first to applaud. Lan Wuji, the Divine Phoenix clan leader Jiang Chuyun, and the others all nodded in agreement. It was obvious that Ji Tianxing's words had touched the bottom of their hearts, and it was also what they wanted to hear the most. The messenger guard no longer hesitated. He held the jade slip with both hands and read in a serious tone, "Last night we received accurate news that our 9th elder and 8th elder were unfortunately captured by Meng Shuai and Qi Yan in the process of carrying out a mission." After hearing the news, the hall fell silent for a moment, and then there was a burst of low voices and discussions. The people of the various large clans and the 100 Refinement Ancient Sect did not know the inside story, but the people of the Nangong clan knew very well. The 9th elder, Nangong Ao, and the 8th elder had been ordered by Ji Tianxing to carry out a mission and help Ji Tianxing draw up a death list. This required the 2 elders to risk their lives and do their best to gather information. The death list was also very important. It was the guiding light of the Rebel Alliance, and it could save a lot of time for everyone to carry out their mission. Now the mission was only halfway done, and Nangong Ao and the 8th elder had been captured at the same time. Without a doubt, the mission of drawing up a death list could not be carried out. The leaders of the various clans all asked Nangong Buhua what had happened. Nangong Buhua could only explain that Ji Tianqing had been planning and preparing for more than a month ago. Nangong Ao and the 8th Elder had led 80% of the Nangong clan's intelligence network to draw up a death list. All the God Kings present knew that the capture of the 2 elders at this time would cause a lot of damage to the operation. At this moment, everyone was worried and they could not help but discuss in low voices. "Sai, this is really a bad start." "That's right. We just came up with a plan, but we haven't even started and we've already met with such a setback." No wonder the Meng Shuai and the Imperial Tutor did not make any big moves in the past 2 months when they sensed the danger. It turns out that they secretly took action and caught our eyes first. The Meng Shuai and Qi Yan are very cunning. They only captured the 2 elders of the Nangong clan and did not kill them directly. This way we will be in a passive position and will not be able to fight back. Seeing that everyone was discussing, Ji Tianqing said in a dignified tone, "Everyone, do not worry. We have only just started our operation and this setback is expected. When we officially take action in the future, who knows how much more danger and killing we will encounter. It will be even more intense than this." Hearing this, everyone thought that it made sense, so they stopped talking and looked at him, waiting for his decision. Ji Tianqing continued, "The Meng Shuai and the Imperial Tutor are both cunning foxes. They chose to capture Nangong Ao and the 8th Elder alive, so they must have a follow-up plan. Although Nangong Ao is my friend and I am worried about his safety, we must not panic. But we can't lose our footing. Let's keep calm and see how Meng Shuai and the Imperial Preceptor make their moves before we make a decision." In addition, there are several ancient clans and dozens of top factions who are still watching the situation and wavering. Today's incident is the first test we have to solve. If we can't even pass this test, how are we going to deal with the Meng Shuai and the Imperial Tutor? If we can successfully pass this trial, the clans and forces that are watching from the sidelines should have more confidence in us. After listening to his analysis, the clan leaders and sect masters calmed down and stopped worrying. The clan leaders thought of a question and one of them asked, "Alliance leader, if this old man is so bold as to ask, what will you do if more ancient clans and sects come to join you and want to form an alliance with you after we resolve this crisis?" When Lan Wuji asked this question, the hall fell silent. Everyone looked at Ji Tianqing waiting for his answer. Ji Tianqing answered without hesitation, "The goal of our alliance is to overthrow the Shura God Emperor's rule and save the people of the boundless heaven continent. If those ancient clans and factions also come for this goal, I welcome like-minded people to join. However, they have already exceeded the 1-month deadline I gave them. Therefore, in my heart, the treatment that they receive is absolutely not as important as the treatment that everyone present receives." Chapter 4082. Ji Tianqing's words were rather general and did not have a specific standard. But Lan Wuji, the patriarchs and sect masters felt inexplicably much better when they heard this. Although the treatment and benefits we received were far from what we had originally expected, we formed the first alliance with Kenyan. However, since we were the first to form an alliance with the Sword God, we are naturally the people he trusts the most. We took a huge risk and took a gamble to be the first to form an alliance with Kenshin. This is the treatment we deserve. Those clans and forces that joined later can't be compared to us. Such a thought flashed through the minds of the experts. Now that things had come to this, the remaining worries in everyone's hearts dissipated. Ji Tianqing waved his hand to dismiss the messenger guard and said to the patriarchs and sect masters, "I will deal with the matter of the 2 elders being captured. You all act according to the original plan and do not delay." The patriarch of the Divine Phoenix clan, Lan Wuji, and the others all bowed and said yes in unison before leaving the light hall one after another. As they left, the patriarchs were still discussing something in low voices. On the other side, the internal affairs elder of the Nangong clan had already arranged accommodations for the experts of the 8 forces. The experts of each force lived in a palace and kept a distance from each other. After the people of the 8 forces had left, the elders of the Nangong clan also left one after another. In the light hall, only Ji Tianqing, Nangong Buhua and Nangong Nihuang were left. It was only now that Ji Tianqing frowned, his face became grave, and a trace of worry flashed across his eyes. Nangong Nihuang could not help but say, "Young master, are you worried about Nangong Ao and the 8th elder?" Ji Tianqing nodded, indicating that he agreed. Nangong Nihuang comforted in a gentle voice, "Don't worry, didn't you just say it? Meng Shuai and Qi Yan naturally have other intentions for capturing them alive, so they will not be in danger for the time being. Nangong Buhua shook his head and said in a heavy tone, "This should be just young Master Long's words to comfort people. The two elders are only safe for the time being. Furthermore, Nangong Ao may not die, but the eighth elder may not." Nangong Nihuang immediately frowned and asked worriedly and doubtfully, "Why?" Ji Tianxing explained, "The Meng Shuai and the Imperial Tutor are not so small. They will not target the two elders. Their target is me. Nangong Ao is my friend and he is still useful to the Meng Shuai and the Imperial Tutor, but the eighth elder." Nangong Nihuang was smart and immediately understood what he meant. "Young master, you mean, if Meng Shuai and the Emperor's preceptor want to extort a confession by torture or intimidate us, they will definitely choose to kill the eighth elder. Will they keep Nangong Ao and use his life to force you to show yourself? Not young master Long Buhua, Xianxia's, young have us. Kill young master. How sinister and despicable." Nangong Nihuang was so angry that her face was as cold as frost, and her eyes shone with a cold light. Ji Tianxing said calmly, "If I am not wrong, the Meng Shuai will send a message to me within 2 days at the latest. They will use Nangong Ao as a hostage to force me to show myself." Nangong Nihuang's face was full of anxiety. She quickly asked, "Young master, what should we do? Do you have a good plan?" Ji Tianxing smiled coldly and said, "How can I have the best of both worlds when dealing with such a despicable but practical method? I can't sit by and watch Nangong Ao be killed. I must save him. Master Nangong, please organize all the information sent back by the two elders and give it to me immediately. I will set out tonight to rescue Nangong Ao." Nangong Buhua and his daughter were both surprised and quickly tried to dissuade him. "No. Absolutely not. Young Master Long, you know that the Meng Shuai will set up a massive ambush and try to kill you. We must not let you die. Young Master, we know that you are very worried about Nangong Ao's safety, but you are the leader of the Rebel Alliance and the hope of all of us. Nothing can happen to you. I believe that even if Nangong Ao knows about this, he will not agree with your decision. Yes. There are no cowards in the Nangong clan. Nangong Ao would rather commit suicide than put you in a desperate situation." Both father and daughter were a little agitated. They blocked Ji Tianxing from both sides, refusing to let him take the risk no matter what. Ji Tianxing was both touched and amused. He quickly comforted the father and daughter and said, "Don't be so emotional. Calm down and think about what I just said. First, with my strength except for the 5 god emperors, no one can hurt me. Even the Meng Shuai and the Imperial Tutor together are not enough. Second, the Meng Shuai may need 1 or 2 days to negotiate with me, and I will set out tonight. He will not be prepared at all. I will sneak into their encirclement and rescue Nangong Ao a day or 2 in advance. Of course, the most important thing is that only the 2 of you know about this. You must keep it a secret." After listening to his analysis, Nangong Buhua and Nangong Nihuang finally calmed down. The father and daughter thought about it carefully and realized that it was indeed reasonable. Most of their worries dissipated. Nangong Buhua thought for a moment and said, "Young Master Long, your analysis is very reasonable. I also believe in your strength and means. But this is your prediction. What if the Meng Shuai does not do it?" Ji Tianxing smiled and said, "No matter what the Meng Shuai wants to do, I have to rescue Nangong Ao first." Nangong Nihuang said again, "Young master, it is too dangerous for you to act alone. I want to go with you. Nangong Ao is not only your friend, but also my clansman and elder brother." Ji Tianxing turned to look at her and said seriously, "First, I am not alone. My family and friends are all in my god artifact space. Second, it is more secretive for me to act alone. The probability of successfully rescuing Nangong Ao is higher. If there is someone following me, not to mention you, even a 9th heaven realm god king like your father might become a burden." This was another way to tell Nangong Nihuang that she would be a burden if she followed him. She was instantly embarrassed. The father and daughter were still a little worried and wanted to remind Ji Tianxing of something. But Ji Tianxing waved his hand and said solemnly, "Those few clan leaders and Su Balian will definitely discuss in private how I will solve this problem. I hope you can keep it a secret for me and not let a 4th person know. Besides, when I am not in the Yenshu Grotto Heaven Nangong family head, you have to preside over the situation. There must not be any trouble." Nangong Buhua knew the seriousness of the matter. The rebel alliance had just been formed and had not been tested. There was no cooperation, tacit understanding and loyalty. Therefore the next few days would be a very crucial period. Although it was dangerous for Ji Tianxing to rescue Nangong Ao, it was also very important for him to stay in the Yenshu Grotto Heaven to preside over the situation. Chapter 4083. In the middle of the night, Yenshu Grotto Heaven was in complete silence. Only groups of guards were still patrolling and no one else was moving around. For the past month, the defense and security of Yenshu Grotto Heaven had been tight. For some reason, the number of patrols and guards had increased by 50% since the evening. Now the defense of Yenshu Grotto Heaven had reached its peak and it was impregnable. Many guards guessed that the rebel alliance had just been formed today, and the war was about to begin. That was why they were so nervous. The entire Yenshu Grotto Heaven was filled with a solemn and murderous aura. The 8 families, led by the Feng clan and the Lan clan, were well behaved after staying in their respective palaces. They did not move around as they were busy with their tasks, dispatching their elite disciples to Yenshu Grotto Heaven as soon as possible. Nangong Buhua, Nangong Nihuang and the rest were busy as usual, and there was nothing unusual. As for Chief Ji Tianxing, he returned to the secret room to cultivate in seclusion as usual. But other than Nangong Buhua and his daughter, no one knew about Ji Tianxing's real whereabouts. In fact, he had quietly left Yenshu Grotto Heaven and rushed to the northeast at his fastest speed. In the evening, Nangong Buhua sorted out the information from Nangong Ao and the 8th elder and handed it to Ji Tianxing. The few jade slips recorded the information that the 2 elders had risked their lives to investigate for more than a month. Fortunately, the 2 elders had split up to increase their efficiency. In more than a month, they had used the Nangong clan's intelligence network to investigate more than 60 regions, and drew up a death list. According to their speed, they would have completed the task in at most a month's time, and produced a complete and detailed death list. But unfortunately they were caught at this critical juncture. When the 8th elder and Nangong Ao split up, with Yenshu Grotto Heaven as the center line, one headed to the east and the other to the west. The 8th elder was in charge of the southwest and northwest regions, while Nangong Ao was in charge of the southeast and northeast regions. Before Nangong Ao was caught, he was in the Hutian region in the northeast. The information from the Nangong clan also stated that the battle took place in the Hutian region, within the borders of the Golden River Empire. Therefore Ji Tianxing had a clear goal. After leaving Yenshu's cave, he rushed to Hutian region as fast as he could. His flying speed was very fast, but in order to be even faster he used the god-slaying battleship. The god-slaying battleship's formations were fully activated. Every 2 hours, it would consume resources worth billions of godstones. It sped towards the northeast at a speed faster than light. Most importantly, when the deity-slaying battleship flew above the sea of clouds, it would not shine with divine light. It would also conceal its tracks and aura. Therefore Ji Tianxing sped all the way without being discovered by anyone. From the Yenshu cave to the Hutian region, even with the speed of a peak divine king, it would still take 4 days to fly non-stop. However, with the god-slaying battleship at full power, it only took 1.5 days to arrive. Of course, the price he had to pay was also very high. He had consumed more than 100 billion god stones and cultivation resources. This was the entire wealth of many high god kings. If the Nangong clan knew about this, they would definitely be shocked and touched. Early in the morning when the sun rose, the god-slaying battleship arrived at the Hutian region and was about to enter the territory of the Golden River Empire. Ji Tianxing had predicted that the Meng Shuai would send a message to the Nangong clan 1 day later. In fact, he had overestimated the Meng Shuai's efficiency. After 1.5 days, the Nangong clan finally received a message from the Meng Shuai. After receiving the message, Nangong Buhua did not waste any time and immediately forwarded it to Ji Tianxing. Ji Tianxing had just entered the territory of the Golden River Empire when he received the message from Nangong Buhua. After reading the message, he immediately frowned. His face was somewhat gloomy and his eyes flashed with cold, killing intent. The situation was just as he had expected. The patrol commander Qian was in the northwest. After capturing the 8th elder, he interrogated him for 2 days and 2 nights and then killed him. The 8th elder was beheaded in public, and his corpse was still hanging outside the capital of an empire. After capturing Nangong Ao in the Hutian region, the Meng Shuai left that very night. Now the Meng Shuai was using Nangong Ao's life to threaten the Nangong clan to hand over the Kenshin. Of course, the Meng Shuai also guessed that the Nangong clan would not exchange Kenshin's life for Nangong Ao's. Therefore, the Meng Shuai purposely left an address and target to lure the Nangong clan and the Kenshin to take revenge. The Meng Shuai announced that at noon on the 14th of April he would publicly execute Nangong Ao outside the capital of the true martial domain, the true martial empire. In order to punish the traitor, he would torture Nangong Ao by 1,000 cuts and refine him with soul fire. This was the only way to warn the various forces of the boundless heaven continent and intimidate the traitors. After hearing this news, Ji Tianxing understood that the Meng Shuai and the imperial tutor had planned to set up an inescapable net in the true martial domain. Damn it! I miscalculated. Their trap is not in the Hetian region, but in the true martial domain. When Ji Tianxing and Nangong Buhua were discussing countermeasures, they did not consider this detail. As a result, he spent hundreds of billions of god stones to rush to the Hetian region as quickly as possible, only to end up empty-handed. This also meant that the Meng Shuai and the imperial tutor were very cunning and difficult to deal with. Fortunately, it was not a big problem. Ji Tianxing steered the deity-slaying battleship and continued to fly north. He calculated silently, the 14th of April, which is 7 days later. The true martial domain is in the north, very close to the headquarters of the Meng Shuai and the imperial tutor. Under normal circumstances, if I bring Nangong Buhua and the rest from the Yenshu Grotto Heaven to the true martial domain, we can reach there in 7 days. If we relax or slow down, we might not be able to rescue Nangong Ao in time. The Meng Shuai's deadline is very accurate. Fortunately, Ji Tianxing had acted in advance and arrived at the Hetian region at an unimaginable speed. If he flew north for another day, he would reach the true martial domain. This was his biggest advantage. If he did not leave the Yenshu Grotto Heaven in advance, he would not have a secret weapon like the deity-slaying battleship. Then he would have fallen into the Meng Shuai's trap and rushed to the true martial domain with Nangong Buhua and the rest, only to fall into the trap and be ambushed from all sides. As he steered the deity-slaying battleship towards the north, Ji Tianxing sent a message to Nangong Buhua. I have arrived at the Hetian region and am on my way to the true martial domain. This matter is in the bag, you don't have to worry. Also, act according to the original plan. We must deceive everyone. Not long after, Nangong Buhua received his message and immediately gathered all the clan leaders and suzerains to the Great Light Hall for a meeting. At the same time, Ji Tianxing, who had been cultivating in seclusion in the secret chamber, walked out of the secret chamber and stepped into the Great Light Hall. Chapter 4084. Within 15 minutes, more than 40 God King experts had gathered in the Great Light Hall. The doors were closed and the guards were guarding the hall. The atmosphere in the hall was very solemn. Ji Tianxing, who was dressed in a white robe and wearing a jade crown, sat on the throne. Nangong Buhua, the 7 clan leaders and Su Balian sat on his left and right. Everyone who was supposed to be here was present. Ji Tianxing asked solemnly, Nangong family head, you said that there was an urgent matter that needed everyone to discuss. What happened? Nangong Buhua quickly got up and bowed. He reported, Alliance Master, I just received an ultimatum from the Meng Shuai. The situation is just as you expected. Inspector Commander Qi Yan has killed our clan's 8th elder. The Meng Shuai has imprisoned our 9th elder and brought him to the true martial region. He will be beheaded on the 14th of April. Next, Ji Tianxing, the clan leaders and the sect leaders started to discuss countermeasures. Everyone was in a heavy mood. They were worried and angry. They were all advising Ji Tianxing and discussing seriously. No one noticed anything strange about Alliance Master Ji Tianxing, who was sitting at the head of the table. After all, the Divine Phoenix clan leader Lan Wuji and Su Balian were all 9th stage god kings. None of them was a peak god king. Only Nangong Buhua and Nangong Nihuang knew that the real Ji Tianxing had arrived in the Hetian region long ago. The Kenshin sitting on the throne was actually a doppelganger left behind by Ji Tianxing. The doppelganger was exactly the same as Ji Tianxing. There was no difference in body or soul aura. Not to mention the 7 clan leaders and Su Balian, even Nangong Buhua and Nangong Nihuang could not tell who was real and who was fake. In fact, the doppelganger only had half of the original's strength. Even so, Ji Tianxing's doppelganger was stronger than an ordinary peak god king. With the strength realms of these divine king powerhouses in the Great Hall, How could they possibly see through any clues? Not long after, the various patriarchs and sect masters came up with a plan with Ji Tianxing. Everyone continued to carry out their mission. They gathered their men and waited for news in the cave of Yanxu. Ji Tianxing would personally head to the true martial domain to rescue Nangong Ao. Although everyone was very worried about his safety, they repeatedly advised him not to put himself in danger. However, he insisted that Nangong Ao was his friend and ally. Since everyone had formed an alliance, they could not easily give up on anyone. No matter how dangerous it was, he had to save Nangong Ao. Of course, these words touched the experts of the various clans and sects, making them feel that this alliance was a wise choice. Thus an hour later, Nangong Buhua, the clan leader of the Divine Phoenix clan Lan Wuji, and more than 30 experts from the 9 forces escorted Ji Tianxing out of Yanxu's cave and sent him on his journey. Everyone waved goodbye to Ji Tianxing outside the cave of Yanxu. After watching his figure disappear into the horizon, the experts returned to the cave of Yanxu. It didn't take long for the news to reach Meng Shuai's hands through some confidential channels. On the surface, the Meng Shuai and the imperial tutor did not do anything for more than a month. In fact, they had already agreed on a plan and secretly made many arrangements. It was inevitable that they would plant spies around the cave of Yanxu and infiltrate the cave of Yanxu. Perhaps, the spies and informants would not be able to find out about the secrets in the cave of Yanxu. However, Ji Tianxing was going to battle openly, and the leaders of the various forces were sending him off. This was a grand occasion. As long as the spies and informants were not blind, they would definitely find out. Soon, the Meng Shuai, who was billions of miles away, received the news that Kenshin had left the cave of Yanxu alone to rescue Nangong Ao. After looking through the transmission jade slip, Meng Shuai laughed coldly a few times in disdain and ordered the divine king powerhouses under his command to increase their speed and advance. As I expected, Kenshin is still as arrogant as before. He knew that I would set up an ambush, but he still came to rescue Nangong Ao alone. He is so arrogant that he looks down on me and the imperial tutor. That is the way to his death. Send my order to speed up and return to the domain of true martial as soon as possible. I will try to increase the power of the traps and ambushes so that Kenshin will die in the domain of true martial. It was obvious that the Meng Shuai was on the divine ship to escort Nangong Ao to the domain of true martial. After all, he had captured Nangong Ao in the Hutian region 3 days ago and left that very night to return to the domain of true martial. He was leading many elite soldiers on 3 divine ships, so he could not speed up. Even if he sped up, it would take him 3 days to reach the domain of true martial. He estimated that Kenshin would take 7 days to reach the domain of true martial. In this way, he would have 4 days to increase the power of the traps and ambushes when he returned to the domain of true martial. As he calculated these things in his mind, the Meng Shuai sneered and muttered to himself, Kenshin, you were too arrogant in the past and that was why you died. Even though you have returned to your peak, you are still so arrogant. This time you will make the same mistake and die without a burial place. Everyone thought that Kenshin was rushing to the domain of true martial after leaving the cave of Yanxu. However, Ji Tianxing's doppelganger flew for hundreds of thousands of miles after leaving the cave of Yanxu. When he saw that no one was watching or following him, he quietly turned back. After 2 hours, he quietly returned to the cave of Yanxu. This matter was still hidden from everyone. Only Nangong Buhua and Nangong Nihuang knew about it. Ji Tianxing's original body continued to drive the deity-slaying battleship to the domain of true martial. Unknowingly, 18 hours had passed. It was now midnight. In 6 hours, the deity-slaying battleship would reach the domain of true martial at dawn. However, Ji Tianxing did not continue forward. Instead, he changed his direction slightly and flew toward the east. The reason why he did not go to the domain of true martial was not because he was afraid of the traps and ambushes set by the Meng Shuai and the imperial tutor. It was because he was sure that the Meng Shuai had not returned to the domain of true martial since he was escorting Nangong Ao. 4 days ago, the Meng Shuai captured Nangong Ao. Even if he immediately left the Hetian region and returned to the domain of true martial, he would still be in the domain of true martial. He had more than 2,000 elite soldiers and 3 divine ships with him. It was impossible for him to travel quickly. Even if there were no delays, it would still take him 6 days to return to the domain of true martial. In other words, the Meng Shuai is now 2 days away from the domain of true martial. Ji Tianxing sat in the cockpit of the deity-slaying battleship and calculated silently. A map of the boundless heaven continent appeared in his mind as he began to deduce the Meng Shuai's route. The distance from the Hutian region to the domain of True Martial was the shortest in a straight line. He knew clearly which regions he would pass through. Since the Meng Shuai was 2 days away from the domain of True Martial, Ji Tianxing immediately deduced that the Meng Shuai should be in the center of the domain of True Martial. His current location was in the northwest of the domain of True Martial. After many deductions and verifications, he finally determined that if he rushed to the domain of True Martial to kill the Meng Shuai, he would most likely encounter the Meng Shuai's divine ships at the northern border of the domain of True Martial. Chapter 4085. The Meng Shuai and the Imperial Tutor spent a month amassing troops in the realm of True Martial and setting up an inescapable trap. They want to use this opportunity to kill me before the Rebel Alliance takes action. This way the boundless heaven continent won't fall into chaos, and they'll pay the smallest price to achieve their ultimate goal. It's a brilliant plan. But they don't know that I won't go to the realm of True Martial. When the Meng Shuai is on his way back to the realm of True Martial, I'll take him by surprise and rescue Nangong Ao. These thoughts flashed through Ji Tianxing's mind, and his lips curled into a playful sneer. War was never a head-on clash between military might and military might. It was more about the use of wisdom and strategy. In the center of the Gale domain, the long night passed and dawn finally arrived. The sky had just brightened, and above a sea of white clouds, 3 divine warships flew past at lightning speed. The leading divine warship was 3,000 meters long and scarlet in color. Its design was fierce and callous, like a divine eagle spreading its wings to kill its prey. This was the Meng Shuai's flagship, a superior king-grade divine warship that could accommodate several thousand soldiers. But at this moment there were only 800 elite soldiers on board. Behind the Meng Shuai's flagship were 2 black divine warships about 800 meters long, one on the left and one on the right. These were the warships of the 2 great generals. In terms of grade, defense and power, they were slightly inferior to the Meng Shuai's flagship. However, in these 2 warships, there were also 800 officers and soldiers. The 2,400 soldiers on these 3 divine warships had won the battle in the Hutian region and captured the 9th elder of the Nangong clan. Naturally, they'd made a great contribution. But on their way back to the realm of True Martial, the soldiers weren't too excited. They knew that the real battle hadn't begun yet. Once they returned to the realm of True Martial, they still had to follow orders and carry out the mission of killing the Kenshin. That was the most important and also the most difficult task. If they could win this battle and successfully kill the Kenshin, then they would truly have made a great contribution, which was worthy of pride and celebration. Therefore, on the way back to the domain of True Martial, the soldiers on the 3 divine warships all quietly circulated and regulated their breathing, conserving their energy. A small number of guards remained vigilant and alert. But in reality they were just carrying out their mission as usual and were not worried about their safety. After all, everyone knew that Kenshin had just received the news and was on his way to the True Martial domain. Even if Kenshin was the fastest, it would still take him 5 to 6 days to arrive. Their journey would be very safe and peaceful. Not only did the soldiers have such thoughts, even Grand Marshal Meng had the same thought. Along the way, the Meng Shuai had been meditating in the secret chamber of the ship and had barely shown his face. He never thought that there would be any danger along the way. His mind was filled with thoughts of how to strengthen the ambush after returning to the True Martial domain. Just as the sun was about to rise, a smear of orange appeared on the horizon. The Meng Shuai's ship and 2 black warships were flying over a vast lake. Suddenly, a 5-colored divine light shot up from the lake in front of the 3 divine warships. Whoosh! The divine light was oval-shaped and about 10,000 miles wide. It instantly rose into the sky like a towering wall. This 5-colored wall of light rapidly expanded, connecting the lake on the ground and the sea of clouds in the sky, forming a massive canopy. The God King generals piloting the 3 divine warships noticed that something was wrong. They immediately sounded the alarm and steered the divine warships to the left and right. However, 5-colored divine light that blotted out the sun also appeared in the sky to the left and right. Whoosh, whoosh, whoosh. 5-colored divine light shot up from the front, back, left and right of the 3 divine warships and gathered high in the sky. In the blink of an eye, A semicircular canopy of 10,000 miles wide sealed off the area. The three divine warships were trapped in the five-colored canopy. They immediately felt a terrifying pressure descend upon them, causing them to tremble violently and descend. Even a fool would know that they had fallen into an ambush. An expert had set up a heaven and earth great array here, trapping them in a trap. Fortunately, the generals piloting the divine warships were relatively calm and carried out a series of emergency plans without panicking. First, they woke up the Meng Shuai and all the soldiers. Then they stopped the divine warships in the sky and activated all the formations to resist the suppression of the heaven and earth formation. The 2,400 soldiers on the three divine warships also appeared to be well trained. After they were awakened, they finished assembling in just 10 breaths and entered a state of readiness for battle. The Meng Shuai walked out of the secret chamber and entered the main hall of the divine warship to personally command his soldiers. When his orders were passed on to the other two divine warships, all the soldiers had finished assembling and were ready for battle. The Meng Shuai released his divine sense to investigate the situation within 10,000 miles. He was furious. His face darkened as he thought to himself, "Which daring bastard dares to set up a formation here to ambush Ben Shuai's warship? Damn bastard, this marshal will definitely skin you alive and pull out your tendons." However, even after his divine sense had searched the surrounding area several times, he still could not find a single person. Damn it! Cowards who hide their heads but show their tails. The Meng Shuai cursed angrily. He immediately ordered the three divine warships to get into formation and forcibly break through the five-colored canopy. Soon, the three divine warships arranged themselves into a sword formation. With the Meng Shuai's warship in the lead, they headed straight for the five-colored canopy in the north. Whoosh! With the Meng Shuai's order, the three divine warships exploded with their fastest speed and fiercest firepower toward the five-colored canopy. Boom! Crack! With a deafening noise, the Meng Shuai's warship was the first to hit the five-colored canopy. Dazzling fragments of divine light burst out and a destructive blast of air burst forth. Within 10,000 miles, the sea of clouds in the sky dissipated, and the lakes on the ground dried up. The endless lake water evaporated and turned into a mist that covered the sky and the sun. However, the five-colored canopy shook violently more than 10 times and cracked, but it did not shatter. On the other hand, the Meng Shuai's warship suffered the violent recoil and was sent flying backward. Fortunately, it flew sideways and did not hit the other two warships. Otherwise, it would have led to a disaster and heavy casualties. Unlike now, where only a small number of people had suffered minor injuries. Before the earth-shattering noise dissipated, the other two black warships hit the five-colored canopy one after another. Boom! Boom! With a muffled boom, the two black warships were also sent flying back, tumbling hundreds of miles away. The five-colored canopy shook violently but did not crack, let alone shatter. A moment later, the three divine warships stabilized themselves as they fell and continued to float in the sky. The defensive power of the five-colored canopy had obviously exceeded the Meng Shuai's expectations. His face grew darker as he pondered how to break this worldly array. Chapter 4086. Even at this moment, Meng Shuai still couldn't guess who set up this great formation to ambush him. As for Ji Tianxing, he did not even think about it. After all, Ji Tianxing had just left Yanshu's grotto heaven not long ago and was still on his way. How could he appear here? Just as the Meng Shuai was using his eye technique to observe the five-colored light shield, some of his subordinates spoke up. The deputy generals beside him all suggested, "Marshal Meng, let's gather all the soldiers and form a battle formation to attack together. We will definitely be able to break this formation." That's right. We used the warship to crash into the formation. In order not to damage the warship, we held back. However, if the soldiers form a battle formation, the impact will be several times stronger. The Meng Shuai also thought that this idea was feasible and was weighing the pros and cons. At this moment, a white light suddenly appeared in the sky ahead. Before anyone could react, the white light flashed across the sky and slashed the waist of the Meng Shuai's warship. Boom! There was a thunderous sound as the white light disappeared, but a huge gap had been cut open at the waist of the warship. The gap was 100 feet long and 10 feet wide. Sparks flew everywhere, divine light shot out and debris spilled out. The incomparably violent force of the impact sent the warship flying, rolling and crashing dozens of miles away. The 800 soldiers in the warship were caught off guard by the sudden attack and were all dizzy from the fall. Fortunately, they were prepared for battle and managed to stabilize themselves in time when the warship was rolling and flying. Otherwise, the 800 soldiers would have been in a mess. Of course, the gap left by the white light was originally a few secret chambers. In one of the secret rooms, there were 8 guards standing guard outside the door. No matter what happened, they would not leave. However, when the white light slashed the warship, 6 of them were killed in an instant. The other 2 protectors were lucky to survive, but they were also severely injured. When the Meng Shuai released his divine sense to check the gap and connected it with the white light, he suddenly understood something. Enemy. The person who ambushed us has finally made his move. That white light just now was sword light. Quick, prepare for battle. The Meng Shuai reacted quickly and immediately figured out the truth. At the same time, he also guessed the purpose of the ambushers. They were probably trying to rescue the person in the secret chamber at the gap. The person imprisoned in the secret chamber was none other than Nangong Ao. The Meng Shuai frowned as various thoughts flashed through his mind. An expert is coming to rescue Nangong Ao. Who wants to rescue Nangong Ao? Kenshin. Impossible. He can't be so fast. It can't be Kenshin or Nangong Buhua or the leaders of the 8 forces. So, it is likely an expert from the ancient era. This ancient clan secretly sided with the sword god and was ordered to save Nangong Ao. In the Meng Shuai was Meng Shuai's guess. And the Meng Shuai was the most. Out of the 20 godly king experts on the flagship, 10 of them immediately stepped forward and led the 300 godly monarch experts out of the flagship. Whoosh, whoosh, whoosh. They flew to the gap at the waist of the flagship and surrounded it, vigilantly watching their surroundings. The remaining 10 god kings and 500 monarchs remained in the flagship. Some of them protected the Meng Shuai, while the others guarded the internal passage. The other 2 black warships that had not been ambushed also became nervous. However, the 3 divine warships were all on high alert. Their nerves were tense. The ambushers who were hiding in the dark had disappeared without a trace. They did not launch any more sneak attacks. There was a dead silence. The atmosphere was so heavy that it seemed as if the air had frozen. Even Meng Shuai couldn't detect the traces and aura of the assailants with his own divine spells. This was too strange. The Meng Shuai also felt that something was wrong. He was a true peak god king. Except for the 5 god emperors, no one should be able to get within 10,000 miles of him and evade his detection. At the thought of this, Meng Shuai's heart felt uneasy. Ji Tianxing was the one who had set up the heaven and earth formation in the middle of the lake. He had calculated that the Meng Shuai would have to pass through here, so he had set up the formation as soon as he arrived. In order to set up the most powerful formation in the shortest time possible and ensure that it could trap the Meng Shuai and his 2,000 elite soldiers, he had used 36 superior king-rank divine artifacts. He had arranged the divine artifacts around him to form the foundation of the formation. Thus, this great formation was completed in half an hour. Moreover, it could withstand the impact of 3 divine battleships without shattering or collapsing. When the 3 warships passed by, Ji Tianxing activated the formation without hesitation and sealed them here. However, he was not in a hurry to act, nor did he reveal himself. He knew full well the goal of this operation. Killing the Meng Shuai and his 2,000 elite soldiers was secondary. His top priority was to rescue Nangong Ao. Thus, he hid in the dark and searched for Nangong Ao's whereabouts. He secretly cast a secret technique to investigate the situation inside the 3 divine warships. According to his speculations, Nangong Ao was most likely imprisoned in the Meng Shuai's warship. He had guessed correctly. He did not investigate the 2 black warships. Instead, he searched for the Meng Shuai's warship and found Nangong Ao's aura. Although the secret chamber where Nangong Ao was imprisoned was protected by several layers of formations, he could not see what was going on inside. However, he saw that after the Meng Shuai had issued the order to fight, the 800 soldiers had gathered. There were still 8 high divine lords standing guard outside one of the secret chambers. Moreover, the defensive formation of that secret room was exceptionally powerful. There were several layers of it inside and outside. Ji Tianxing immediately guessed that Nangong Ao was most likely imprisoned in that secret chamber. Otherwise, the Meng Shuai would not have spent so much effort on an ordinary secret chamber. He had guessed correctly. When he slashed the Meng Shuai's warship and made a huge hole in it, the 6 guards were instantly killed. The 6 guards were killed on the spot, and a layer of the defensive formation of the secret room was also destroyed. The Meng Shuai immediately became nervous. He sent out 10 god kings and 300 divine lords to surround the hole and the secret chamber. This further confirmed Ji Tianxing's speculation. However, he was not in a hurry to show himself or rescue Nangong Ao. After all, the secret chamber was protected by 4 layers of defensive formations and 10 god kings and 300 divine lords were guarding the hole. The Meng Shuai, 10 god kings and 500 divine lords were also on high alert in the warship. Once he showed himself or attacked, the Meng Shuai would be able to detect his location and attack him. If he was surrounded by the Meng Shuai, 20 god kings and 800 divine lords, the 1,600 soldiers on the other 2 warships would do their best to kill him. No matter how powerful he was, there was no way he could withstand the combined attack of a peak god king, 40 god kings and 2,400 divine lords. Chapter 4087. Ji Tianxing was alone against 3 divine warships and 2,400 experts. He could not act rashly. He could only calmly analyze the situation and create opportunities. The Meng Shuai is already on guard. Although he isn't sure that I'm the one who ambushed him, he should have guessed that I'm going to rescue Nangong Ao. I can't save Nangong Ao yet. I have to think of a way to distract them and make the battlefield chaotic. After making up his mind, Ji Tianxing remained invisible and quietly flew toward the 2 black divine warships. It was obviously unwise to continue attacking the Meng Shuai's divine warships. After all, everyone's attention was focused on them. Instead, the 2 black divine warships became their weak points. Swish. The next moment, Ji Tianxing appeared on the side of one of the black divine warships and slashed with his sword as fast as he could. It was still a blinding white sword aura that was 10,000 feet long. It flashed across the sky like a bolt of lightning. In order to prevent the Meng Shuai from seeing through his identity, Ji Tianxing did not use his signature move or even the sword intent of heaven piercing. The attack was powerful, but there was nothing special about it. It was probably not powerful enough to deal with the Meng Shuai. But it was enough to deal with the 2 black divine warships. Boom. Along with an earth-shattering boom, the sword beam struck the black battleship, causing countless sparks and metal fragments to fly everywhere. The black battleship that was 8,000 feet long was actually cut in half by Ji Tianxing. The divine warship was cut in 2. The cut was smooth and flat. Debris and dozens of divine lords were thrown out of the cut. The violent impact threw the 2 halves of the divine warship into the air and sent it tumbling to the ground. Countless screams and cries rang out. Hundreds of divine lords fled the divine warships in a panic and flew in all directions. At this moment, Ji Tianxing swung his fist and sent out a fist shadow the size of a mountain. This was a simplified version of the draconic elephant divine fist. Its power was the same, but it did not have the draconic elephant divine fist. It was simple. He wanted to avoid being recognized by the Meng Shuai. Ping ping ping. The mountain-sized golden fist aura smashed into the crowd, producing a series of muffled sounds. The hundreds of Sir Gods who were fleeing in panic were instantly blasted into minced meat. Blood splattered all over the sky. With just this move, Ji Tianxing had instantly killed more than 100 Sir Gods. The other 600 Sir Gods were scared out of their wits as they ran even faster. The battlefield instantly became chaotic. There were figures everywhere and there was no formation to speak of. The Meng Shuai and the soldiers became alert and turned their attention to the broken warship. Originally, the Meng Shuai wanted to use a secret technique to find out where Ji Tianxing was. However, Ji Tianxing's reaction was too fast. Almost at the same time, he slashed out his sword light and punched out with his fist radiance, and then quickly concealed himself. As a result, the Meng Shuai missed him again and failed to capture his aura and traces. Damn it! This coward is too despicable. The Meng Shuai was so angry that he gritted his teeth and his face turned pale. In his anger, he flew out of the warship and hovered in the sky with a saber in his hand. He had accumulated all his energy and was surrounded by a terrifying murderous aura. He looked around with sharp eyes. This time, his immortal will covered a radius of 10,000 miles and even a speck of dust could be seen. As long as Ji Tianxing attacked again, he would not miss it. He would definitely be able to lock onto Ji Tianxing's aura. However, Ji Tianxing hid at the edge of the array and stared at him from a few thousand miles away, waiting patiently. 100 seconds later, the sky calmed down again. Ji Tianxing did not attack and the Meng Shuai was still on guard. The two halves of the battleship fell to the ground. The 600 Sir Gods who were lucky enough to survive had all escaped and gathered together, still in a state of shock. A few minutes later the wounded were also treated. More than 2,000 soldiers clenched their weapons tightly, their nerves stretched taut to the extreme. However, Xianxia was still calm and did not make a move. A quarter of an hour passed. The world was still silent. Xianxia seemed to have disappeared. The Meng Shuai was slightly tired and irritated. He was even angrier. The more than 2,000 soldiers also began to look at each other in dismay and began to discuss secretly via voice transmission. Where is that coward? Why is there no movement after such a long time? Could it be that he knew that he was not strong enough and that we outnumbered him, so he secretly escaped? That's very likely. With the Meng Shuai here and more than 2,000 of us, whoever shows up will die. Who do you think would be so bold as to kill the Meng Shuai halfway? In the entire boundless heaven continent, I guess it's only Kenshin. But Kenshin has just left Yanshu's cave and is still on his way. How could he appear here? Yes. Even if Kenshin can travel thousands of miles in a second, he can't possibly get here in 2 days. Since the soldiers began to discuss secretly, they naturally let down their guard. The Meng Shuai also began to curse and insult Xianxia. He wanted to provoke Xianxia and force him to show up. Seeing that the time was right, Xianxia quietly approached the second black warship and made his move. This time, in order to not be discovered by the Meng Shuai, he only made one move with his sword. Sword of Apocalypse. He drew on the vast power of the world and made a giant golden sword that was thousands of feet long. It only took him 1/5 of an instant to make this move. After making the move, he retracted his aura and quickly retreated to the edge of the formation. As a result, the Meng Shuai did not have the chance to lock onto his tracks and aura, let alone identify him. Boom. The giant divine sword that was thousands of feet long struck the black warship with the power to destroy everything. In the deafening sound, the black warship that was 8,000 feet long was swallowed by the golden sword light and shattered into pieces. Hundreds of millions of pieces of metal mixed with the flesh and blood of hundreds of Sir Gods sprinkled in the air. After destroying the divine warship, the power of the Sword of Apocalypse did not diminish. It struck the ground again. Coincidentally, the remaining half of the divine warship that fell on the ground was also struck by the sword light and shattered into pieces. Amidst the loud rumbling, a 6,000-mile-long ravine was cut open on the ground, and sand and dust were sent flying into the air. The power of this sword was actually so terrifying. Not only did it destroy a warship, but it also killed more than 700 Sir Gods and dozens of King of Gods. It also turned the battlefield into ruins. The few divine kings and more than 40 divine lords who were lucky enough to survive were covered in blood. They were in an extremely wretched state. They passed through the debris weakly and desperately ran toward the Meng Shuai and the others. Meng Shuai and more than 30 divine kings and more than 1,000 divine lords revealed a look of shock. They were both shocked and furious. They could not imagine how powerful the ambusher was to be able to use such a powerful divine power. Even the Meng Shuai could not do it. Therefore he felt even more uneasy. An incredulous thought appeared in his mind. Chapter 4088. Kenshin. It's you. Must be you. Am I right? The furious and shocked Meng Shuai couldn't help but roar at the empty sky. However, he also felt that this idea was ridiculous and completely unbelievable. However, he couldn't think of anyone other than Kenshin who could have such terrifying means. The soldiers heard Meng Shuai's roar in disbelief. Many of them had strange expressions on their faces. After all, it was too absurd and unbelievable. However, Xianxia had hidden himself and never showed up. Not even his shadow could be seen. No one could verify whether the Meng Shuai was telling the truth or not. The two black warships had been destroyed, leaving only the Meng Shuai's warship in the sky. Of the 2,400 soldiers, there were only about 1,500 left. Many of them were seriously injured and they looked to be in a very sorry state. Earlier, they were confident that victory was within their grasp. Now they were panicking. If they could see their opponent, even if it was really Kenshin, they wouldn't be so panicked. However, the fear of the unknown was the most terrifying. Up until now, the Meng Shuai had lost more than 800 soldiers. They didn't even know who their opponent was. Wasn't that terrifying enough? Of course, what happened earlier couldn't be considered a battle. The enemy had only launched a sneak attack. The Meng Shuai and his soldiers couldn't fight back at all. This was too depressing. However, no matter how panicked and aggrieved they were, they couldn't run away. Moreover, they were all sealed by the five-colored light shield. They couldn't escape. The Meng Shuai was still present and hadn't made a move. No one dared to run away. Thus, the two sides were in a stalemate. The world returned to silence. Ji Tianxing seemed to have disappeared again. The atmosphere became even heavier. Everyone's hearts were heavy. Half an hour later, Meng Shuai and the soldiers under his command were once again impatient and unable to maintain their composure. However, they had learned their lesson this time. Everyone knew that the ambusher was still hiding in the dark and hadn't left. After careful consideration, the Meng Shuai decided to change its strategy. If this continued, the first to collapse would definitely be the soldiers under his command. After all, the Heaven and Earth Great Formation within a radius of 10,000 miles was still operating, constantly exerting pressure. The divine power of more than 1,500 soldiers was being drained at every moment. If the stalemate continued for 2 or 3 days, these soldiers would have exhausted all their strength and would not have any fighting strength left. Meng Shuai calculated in his mind. The previous 3 attacks were to create chaos and divert Ben Shuai's attention. In fact, his real goal was to rescue Nangong Ao. As long as Ben Shuai kept a close eye on Nangong Ao, there was nothing he could do. Moreover, even if he was a Kenshin, he wouldn't dare face Ben Shuai and his 1,000 soldiers head-on. He's been hiding in the dark all this time. Ben Shuai can't catch him, so he can only break the formation first. With this in mind, the Meng Shuai made up his mind and decisively issued an order. Except for the 4 generals piloting the warship, everyone else is to leave the warship and protect it. Especially near the gap. Send more people to keep an eye on the hostage. Thus, all the soldiers left the warship and guarded it with their weapons. Another 5 god kings led 200 monarchs to reinforce the gap, surrounding it so tightly that not even a drop of water could trickle through. The secret room where Nangong Ao was imprisoned became the target of everyone's vigilance. Next, the Meng Shuai ordered the 4 generals piloting the warship to fly slowly. The Meng Shuai personally took the lead and escorted the warship to the 5-colored dome in the north with over 1,000 soldiers. In this way, more than 500 soldiers guarded the gap in the warship while over 1,000 soldiers protected the warship. The Meng Shuai personally used his divine arts to observe the structure and veins of the sealing formation and think of a way to break it. Using offense as defense was indeed a good strategy. If Ji Tianxing continued to be in a stalemate, the Meng Shuai would be able to break the formation and lead the soldiers to escape. If Ji Tianxing lost his cool and attacked the warship, he would be besieged by over 1,000 soldiers. In short, the Meng Shuai had the upper hand again. However, a problem soon arose. 15 minutes later, the Meng Shuai roughly saw the structure and veins of the formation. He had thought it was just a high-grade king-level divine formation. But in fact, it was a supreme-grade king-level divine formation. Even if Ben Shuai were to personally set up a supreme-grade divine formation, it would take at least 10 days to half a month. Could it be that the ambushers knew that Ben Shuai would pass by here half a month ago? That's ridiculous. The Meng Shuai's expression was ugly. His brows were tightly knitted together, unable to relax. Through this supreme-grade king-level divine formation, he realized how terrifying his opponent was. He increasingly suspected that the ambushers hiding in the dark were Kenshin. No matter how ridiculous or unbelievable the answer was, he had to accept it. However, he put aside the question of who the ambushers were for now. His top priority was to find a way to break the formation as soon as possible. 360 million meridians, 36 million nodes, and at least 360 array bases. Such a complex and profound formation, Ben Shuai would have to deduce tens of millions or even hundreds of millions of times to find a way to break it. As he focused on observing the formation, the Meng Shuai felt a headache and a sense of helplessness. If he had seen this array before or if he had deciphered this array before, then it would be fine. At the very least, he would be able to quickly determine the direction to break the formation and choose the correct one from thousands of methods. However, this formation was unfamiliar. He had never come into contact with it before. He could not find a way to break the formation, so he could only deduce and calculate over and over again. He was a peak divine king with an extremely powerful sea of consciousness. He could deduce 3 to 5 times in 15 minutes. However, if he had to deduce tens of millions of times, it would take him years. Unless he was extremely lucky, he would not be able to find the correct way to break the formation after a few hundred tries. Or, if he was so lucky, he would be able to find the correct solution after 2 or 3 tries. Ji Tianxing hid in the dark and observed. He was troubled by the fact that the Meng Shuai was so focused on studying the formation and more than 1,000 soldiers were on high alert. If he tried to stop the Meng Shuai, he would be besieged by the soldiers. However, if he didn't stop them, if Meng Shuai managed to break the formation, these people would be able to escape. Fortunately, he knew that the Meng Shuai's formation skills were ordinary, so he was confident in the great formation of heaven and earth. The Meng Shuai would not be able to break the formation for at least 2 or 3 days. However, he had a misgivings. He was worried that the Meng Shuai would threaten him with Nangong Ao's life and force him to open the formation. Given the Meng Shuai's temperament, this was very likely. Therefore, Ji Tianxing could not wait any longer. He had to act. Sword rain. While the Meng Shuai was not paying attention, he suddenly erupted with all his strength and used his ultimate killing move. In an instant, tens of thousands of silver lights lit up the sky and fell like a meteor shower. Whoosh whoosh whoosh. These were 90,000 giant swords made of stars. They descended from the sky with the power to destroy everything. Chapter 4089. The Meng Shuai's attention was focused on the array. More than 1,000 soldiers were on high alert as they stared at the gap in the battleship and the sky around the battleship. However, they didn't expect that Ji Tianxing's next attack wasn't a sword light, but a fist light. Instead, it was tens of thousands of giant swords that fell from the sky. Before the sword light arrived, the destructive power had already descended and enveloped everyone. Countless soldiers were filled with fear as they subconsciously looked up at the sky. Everyone's scalp tingled when they saw the densely packed starry swords. Feeling the terrifying power of the starry swords, everyone was filled with fear and horror. They almost turned around and fled. Even the Meng Shuai, who was focused on studying the array, was shocked by the power of tens of thousands of starry swords and subconsciously looked up at the sky. At this critical moment, Ji Tianxing did not hesitate and teleported to the gap in the battleship. There were more than 12 god kings and more than 200 Surgods blocking his way. He wanted to pass through the gap in the battleship and enter the battleship to rescue Nangong Ao. He had to break through their blockade. Therefore, he made a prompt decision and brandished his divine sword, slashing out 9 golden sword lights towards the crowd in front of him. The 12 god kings and more than 200 Surgods were looking up at the starry swords in the sky. They were filled with fear and panic. They were unprepared. Ji Tianxing did not hide his tracks and aura and directly launched his attack. After all, success or failure depended on this move. As long as he could successfully enter the battleship and rescue Nangong Ao, Ji Tianxing was not afraid of exposing his identity and tracks. Bang bang bang. Before the god kings and Surgods could react, they were enveloped by the golden sword lights. Following a series of dull explosions, the golden lights flashed in the crowd and blood and flesh splattered everywhere. Not only were there dozens of Surgods, but there were also 7 middle-level god kings and a 7th-level high-level god king. They were all killed by the golden sword lights. When Ji Tianxing unleashed his sword Dao divine ability with all his might, even a 7th-stage realm high-level god king would be instantly killed. However, not only were the middle-level god kings and Surgods killed physically, their godheads were also shattered. That high-level god king's body was destroyed, and his godhead was severely damaged, but he survived. Ji Tianxing tore a hole in the defensive line formed by everyone, and without hesitation he went through the hole and entered the warship. At this moment the others reacted. The Meng Shuai also let out a roar and rushed over murderously. He finally found Ji Tianxing's tracks and locked onto the aura of Ji Tianxing's soul. When he confirmed that the ambusher was Kenshin, his heart was filled with shock and disbelief. This caused him to be stunned for a moment. But in that instant the ending was changed. Rumble. In the next moment 90,000 star swords descended like dense raindrops, covering a radius of 10,000 miles. Everyone and the Meng Shuai's warships were hit by countless starry swords. The Meng Shuai was the strongest among them. The starry swords could not hurt him, but they were able to trap him. He could not escape, so he could only use his defensive divine powers to block the attacks of the swords. More than 1,000 soldiers suffered. Under the bombardment of the swords, blood and flesh splattered everywhere, and they screamed in agony. The heaven and earth formation within a radius of 10,000 miles had completely turned into a silver ocean, filled with 90,000 star swords. It was chaos. Even though everyone knew that Ji Tianqing had rushed into the warship and was crazily hacking at the defensive array of the secret chamber, no one could stop him. After all, the starry swords were too powerful. Even the Meng Shuai could not escape, let alone the others. Bang! 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 Inside the warship, Ji Tianqing swung his divine hammer as fast as lightning and smashed the door of the secret chamber. Not far from his feet, 2 high-level divine lords had already been reduced to a pile of flesh and blood. He had killed the 2 guards as soon as he entered the warship. Then, in order to save time and break the defense of the secret chamber as soon as possible, he did not use the Sword of Burial of Heaven. Instead, he took out the divine hammer. The supreme-grade king-level divine artifact was indeed extraordinary. Boom, boom, boom. The superior king-level divine array that sealed the secret chamber was soon shattered. Crack. Boom. Along with the sound of shattering, layer after layer of defensive formations were smashed into pieces, bursting into balls of divine light fragments. If Ji Tianqing hadn't forcefully destroyed the array formations, he would have needed a quarter of an hour to break them, no matter how high his attainments in the array Dao were. However, he used the divine hammer to attack with all his might. In just 3 breaths he had destroyed all the layers of array formations. Finally, he smashed the door of the secret chamber with the last blow. The door, made of God King level metal, was dented and fell to the ground with a loud clang. Swish. Ji Tianqing stepped through the door as fast as lightning and rushed into the secret room. The secret chamber was 50 feet wide and dark. It was cold and bone-chilling. The floor was engraved with array patterns, and they were glowing with dark divine light. A bronze obelisk stood in the middle of the floor. A deity clan man in ragged clothes and covered in blood was chained to the obelisk. The chains were all specially made king-level divine artifacts. They pierced through the man's shoulder blades and ribs and locked his wrists and ankles. Not only did the chains bind his body, but they also restricted his divine power. The array on the floor was still operating, and it also sealed his divine power. His hair was disheveled and he was covered in wounds and blood. It was obvious that he had been tortured. Even though there was such a big commotion outside and Ji Tianqing rushed into the secret chamber, he still kept his head down and did not react. Ji Tianqing reached out and brushed away the man's blood-stained hair. Only then did he see the almost deformed face covered in blood. It was Nangong Ao. Apparently, Nangong Ao was half dead after being tortured. He was in a coma. Ji Tianqing's heart clenched as he watched. Anger surged in his chest and his killing intent rose. Nangong Ao, wake up. He slapped Nangong Ao's cheeks and tried to wake him up. Unfortunately, Nangong Ao's injuries were too severe. He could not wake up and his breathing was very weak. Ji Tianqing did not dare to waste any time. He quickly swung the divine hammer and destroyed the array on the floor. Then he used the divine hammer to break the chains that bound Nangong Ao. Nangong Ao was finally saved, but he could not stand up. He fell straight to the ground. Ji Tianqing did not hesitate to catch him and put him into the distorted time and space of Jutian Tenju Tower. He handed him over to Yun Yao, Chao Qingyu and the others for treatment. At this point he had successfully saved Nangong Ao. Even if his identity was exposed and he had to face more than 1,000 experts alone, he was not afraid. He had no more worries. When he left the battleship and returned to the sky with the divine hammer in his left hand and the sword of burial of heaven in his right hand, his body was already burning with blood flames. Those flames were condensed from anger and killing intent. They soared into the sky and were terrifying. At this time, the 90,000 starry giant swords gradually dissipated. Outside the shattered battleship, everything within a radius of 10,000 miles had become scorched ruins. It was a tragic scene. Chapter 4090. The 90,000 star swords wreaked havoc in the formation for 5 breaths of time. In just 5 breaths, the world within 10,000 miles was shattered and filled with blood and gore. When the stellar swords rained down, more than 800 divine lords and 10 godly kings were killed in the first wave. Their bodies were reduced to smithereens and their godheads were shattered as well. Meng Shuai and many godly kings defended themselves with their arts and destroyed a few thousand stellar swords. But their efforts were futile. The remaining more than 80,000 starry swords shuttled back and forth in the sky, slaughtering everything in their way. As a result, over 500 divine lord experts and over a dozen divine king experts died tragically under the mincing of the 10,000 huge swords. Not even their corpses remained. Even Meng Shuai's worship was destroyed after more than 20,000 attacks. Along with a series of cracking noises, the 1,000-foot-long battleship was torn apart, turning into pieces that blotted out the sky and covered the earth, scattering in the ruins. At this moment all the stellar swords were gone. The sky became empty. Only Ji Tianxing, Meng Shuai, the 7 wounded and blood-stained god kings, and over 20 god monarchs who were lucky enough to survive were left. Of course, the survival of the 20 divine lords had nothing to do with their strength. It was pure luck. But their injuries were so severe that they could barely participate in the battle. The two sides faced off in the sky, staring at each other in silence. Killing intent filled the air. At this moment Ji Tianxing no longer concealed his tracks and aura. This was the first time Meng Shuai and the others had seen him clearly since the battle began. After a while it was Meng Shuai who spoke first. Kenshin. I didn't expect it to be you. Meng Shuai had participated in the battle where Kenshin had fallen. He had also attacked Kenshin with the Azure God Emperor. Therefore he would never forget Kenshin's appearance and divine soul aura. At this time Ji Tianxing's divine soul aura was the same as before, and his appearance was also 90% similar. Meng Shuai had mixed feelings when he said this. He was shocked, angry and a little scared. After all, the Kenshin's reputation was too great. Even after 1,000 years, it still hadn't weakened. Ji Tianxing stared at the Meng Shuai with bloodshot eyes and said with a murderous look, "Who else can kill you bastards other than me? Who else could lead the people of the world to destroy Azura's dark reign? Meng Shuai, I haven't seen you in 1,000 years. You've become a peak divine king and your courage has grown. Azura isn't in the god realm, yet you're still dreaming of killing me. What a joke." Meng Shuai was so humiliated that he gnashed his teeth and roared, "Long Tian. No matter how great your fame is, you're also merely a peak divine king. Ben Shuai and the imperial tutor are both peak divine kings, and they control the entire boundless heaven continent. Why can't they kill you? No matter how strong you are, no matter how confident you are, you still have to rely on schemes and tricks. Do you dare to fight Ben Shuai's 2,000 soldiers head-on and fight to the death?" Ji Tianxing sneered disdainfully. "Schemes and tricks are your and the imperial tutor's forte. If you weren't so despicable, why would I be here?" Meng Shuai couldn't refute him, so he changed the topic and asked with confusion, "I still don't understand. How could you be here?" Of course he wouldn't ask how Kenshin could arrive here in just 2 days after leaving Yanshu's cave. Now he could vaguely guess the answer. Ji Tianxing said expressionlessly, "The Kenshin that just departed from Yanshu's cave was actually my doppelganger. It was just an act to numb you." "I knew it." This answer confirmed Meng Shuai's conjecture and he suddenly realized. Just as he had guessed, the real Kenshin had departed long ago. Kenshin guessed that he had planted spies in Yanshu's cave, and purposely left a doppelganger to numb him. "Brilliant. I have to say your schemes are better than Ben Shuai's." Meng Shuai admired him from the bottom of his heart. At the same time he realized that Kenshin was different from before. Kenshin was arrogant and confident. Although he was strong, he had obvious weaknesses. Kenshin in front of him was, of course, more difficult to deal with. But Ben Shuai still can't believe it. It's only been a few days since Ben Shuai captured Nangong Ao. How could you get here from Yanshu's cave in 5 days? Moreover, you calculated the route and time Ben Shuai would return to the domain of True Martial and set up a formation here in advance? Even though Meng Shuai knew the answer, he still found it hard to believe. In his opinion, Ji Tianxing's speed was already terrifying for him to be able to get here. To be able to calculate his route back to the domain of True Martial meant that Ji Tianxing was shrewd enough, and his deduction ability was superb. However, to set up a king-level formation here in advance was too illogical. Even if you're the best formation master, it would still take you 5 to 6 days to set up such a formation. Seeing Meng Shuai's confused and shocked expression, Ji Tianxing sneered, "It's because I can do things that ordinary people can't believe and create miracles time and time again, that I'm worthy of the name Kenshin. Otherwise, how do you think I can command the heroes and conquer the vast heaven continent?" He did not waste his breath explaining to Meng Shuai. In his eyes, Meng Shuai was already a dead man. When Meng Shuai heard his words, he felt that it was very reasonable. He frowned and pondered. Ji Tianxing did not waste any more time. He raised the divine hammer and the sword of burial of heaven with both hands, pointed at Meng Shuai and the others and said, "Didn't you just say that you want to fight to the death with me? As you wish, let's fight to the death. Let me see if you've made any progress in the past 1,000 years. As soon as he finished speaking, his body emitted a golden light, and an earth-shattering power erupted. He waved the sword of burial of heaven with his right hand, and slashed out 8 sacred sword rays toward the god kings and god emperors. He waved the divine hammer with his left hand, and used all of his power to smash at Meng Shuai. In an instant, a fierce wind blew and dust and sand swirled. Terrifying murderous intent filled the area for thousands of miles. The 7 injured god kings and more than 20 god emperors were intimidated by his murderous intent and power, and they all retreated. Meng Shuai could not retreat. He could only grit his teeth and fight back with the divine saber in both hands. Collapse of 1,000 mountains. Meng Shuai roared. He held the divine saber with both hands and slashed out 18 sword rays. The 7 god kings and more than 20 god emperors saw that it was useless to retreat, and they were about to be swallowed by the sword rays, so they all counterattacked. They had a strong desire to survive, so they used their trump cards to block the sword rays at all costs. In the next moment, the sky full of divine light and shadows collided violently in the sky, causing an earth-shattering explosion. Bang! 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 Rumble. Amidst the loud noise, blood splattered everywhere. Pieces of flesh and blood splattered everywhere. Miserable cries rang out one after another. It was extremely miserable. More than 20 injured Sir Gods were smashed to smithereens on the spot. None of them survived. Even out of the 7 god kings, 4 of them were slain. Chapter 4091. In the blink of an eye, another 4 godly kings and more than 20 godly emperors were slain by Ji Tianxing. Of the Meng Shuai soldiers, only 3 godly kings were left. They were covered in blood and looked miserable. In less than an hour out of the 2,400 soldiers, only 3 god kings remained. No one could imagine what had happened during this time. Even the Meng Shuai, who had seen the entire process with his own eyes, found it hard to believe. Ji Tianxing had single-handedly killed nearly 2,400 soldiers. This was too preposterous and too terrifying. When Ji Tianxing killed the 20 godly emperors and 4 godly kings, the Meng Shuai had thought of stopping him. Unfortunately, Ji Tianxing's full-powered hammer restrained him. He dared not be careless and could only use all his strength to defend himself. Only then did he barely manage to block the hammer's bombardment. Even so, he was sent flying 10 miles away. He had to gasp for breath for a while before he could calm his chaotic divine power. As for protecting the godly kings and godly kings under his command, he was powerless. At this point, the Meng Shuai was keenly aware of Ji Tianxing's terrifying strength. He was already terrified. He finally understood where Kenshin's courage came from to command the heroes and rise up against the Azura God Emperor. With Kenshin's terrifying strength, no one could do anything to him unless the 5 god emperors came in person. Even though the Meng Shuai was now a peak godly king, he could only look up to Kenshin. He was no match for him. This was because he knew that there was a huge gap between peak godly kings. Die. Ji Tianxing was not like the Meng Shuai, who would have such thoughts in the face of death. He locked onto the Meng Shuai's aura and swung his hammer again. He also sent out 3 beams of sword light at the 3 godly kings. The 3 godly kings were all Meng Shuai's trusted generals. Normally they were all powerhouses who could move unhindered and command the wind and the clouds. At this moment they were already heavily injured. Their bodies were covered in blood and they were in a very sorry state. When the 3 destructive sword lights came, they didn't dare to cast any spells to block them. They could only run for their lives. They had wanted to teleport away, but the area within a radius of 10,000 miles had been sealed off by the array. The space had also been confined, making it impossible for them to teleport. Helpless, they could only retreat and fly away. However, their speed was not fast enough and they were quickly caught up by the 3 sword lights. Ping ping ping. Another series of muffled sounds rang out as the 3 god kings were struck by the sword light. Blood splattered everywhere. Their divine bodies were destroyed, turning into countless pieces of flesh and blood that scattered from the sky. 3 divine deities flew out, burning with divine flames. They erupted with the fastest speed, fleeing in all directions. Their divine bodies were destroyed, but they were lucky enough to survive. However, his godhead had also been severely damaged and cracks had appeared on it. Even though the area within a radius of 10,000 miles had been sealed off and they had nowhere to run, they could only swim around the periphery of the great array. However, their strong desire to survive drove them to fly away quickly. They didn't dare to stop. Ji Tianxing didn't waste any time chasing after the three divine deities. He had just sent the Meng Shuai flying with his hammer. At this moment the Meng Shuai had retreated 100 miles away. He was panting violently and raised his hand to wipe the blood from the corner of his mouth. Ji Tianxing took advantage of the situation to chase after the Meng Shuai. He teleported to the front of the Meng Shuai and wielded the divine hammer and the sword of burial of heaven at the same time. The mountain-like thunderbolts and the earth-shattering golden sword lights drowned out the Meng Shuai's figure. The Meng Shuai was terrified. He knew that he couldn't dodge, so he could only hold his treasured sword with both hands and block with all his might. Kaboom! In the earth-shattering noise, the three golden sword lights hit him hard and golden fragments burst into the sky. The three sword lights all collapsed and a destructive shockwave burst out. However, the Meng Shuai was also knocked away, and the treasured sword in his hand was thrown away. Then, a lightning ball the size of a mountain fell from the top of his head with an incomparably violent divine power. Without his weapon and his divine power, the Meng Shuai had no time to dodge the attack. At this critical moment he roared angrily. He ignored the backlash of his divine power and used all his strength to form a protective shield. Swoosh! The moment the thunderbolts hit him, his body was covered by a layer of oval-shaped colorful shield. Protected him like an eggshell. The shield wasn't very big, only about 3 meters tall. However, the Meng Shuai unleashed his full potential and released his most powerful divine power to form such a small shield. Its defensive power was also increased by several times. Kaboom! Unfortunately, no matter how strong his shield was, it couldn't withstand the thunderbolts. In the deafening noise, his shield was smashed into pieces and he was swallowed by the thunderbolts. He fell from the sky and smashed into the ruins with a thud. The scorched earth had been smashed into a deep pit with a radius of hundreds of meters. Dust flew up into the air. When the Meng Shuai got up from the pit, his body was charred black and smoking. He was unrecognizable. His crown had been shattered and his hair was fluffy like a bird's nest. He looked terrible. Moreover, his internal and external injuries were very serious. His divine power was completely disordered and his consciousness was a little blurry. After being severely injured, his combat power had decreased by more than half. He quickly took out a few divine elixirs and tried to heal himself. However, Ji Tianxing didn't give him a chance to breathe. He picked up the divine hammer and the sword of burial of heaven again and charged at him fiercely. Seeing the divine hammer shooting out nearly 100 thunderbolts and dozens of sword lights, the Meng Shuai was terrified. Stop! Kenshin, don't kill Ben Shuai. The Meng Shuai knew he couldn't resist. If he was hit by the thunderbolts and sword lights, even if he didn't die, his divine body would be destroyed. Therefore he roared at the top of his lungs, trying to negotiate with Ji Tianxing. If you kill Ben Shuai, the entire boundless heaven continent will fight you to the death. Don't even think about knowing our plan. After thinking about it, he didn't seem to have anything to threaten Ji Tianxing with. He could only come up with these two reasons. However, Ji Tianxing turned a deaf ear to his words. The thunderbolts and sword lights didn't slow down at all. They immediately engulfed the Meng Shuai's figure. The moment before the Meng Shuai's body was destroyed, he heard Ji Tianxing's reply. If I kill you, I will still know everything. That's right. After killing the Meng Shuai, Ji Tianxing could refine his quintessence fragments and extract his divine soul memories. In this way he could even avoid torture and negotiation. He could get all the information he wanted. Meng Shuai immediately reacted and also thought of this point. But it was too late. Bang! 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 Hundreds of thunderbolts and dozens of sword lights exploded with destructive power, cutting the Meng Shuai into pieces on the spot. In an earth-shattering explosion, flesh and blood splattered, and divine light splashed in all directions. The Meng Shuai didn't even have time to scream before he was reduced to ashes. Even his quintessence was severely damaged and several cracks appeared on it. He barely managed to stay awake. His quintessence burned with flames as he ran north as fast as he could. Chapter 4092. However, the array was still in place. Meng Shuai's godhead could not escape the seal of the array, just like the three superior god kings. However, he could not stay in the array. He had to escape even if it meant risking his life. Whoosh! Meng Shuai's walnut-sized diamond-shaped godhead blazed with 5 colored flames as it slammed into the 5-colored light wall in the north like a shooting star. As long as he could break through the light wall, he would have a chance to survive even if he was on his last breath. The other 3 God Kings' godheads had been circling the edge of the array, full of fear. When they saw Meng Shuai leading the charge, they were overjoyed. They hurriedly followed Meng Shuai to the north. If they did not fight, they would die here anyway. Rather than that, they might as well take a gamble with Meng Shuai. If Meng Shuai could break through the 5-colored light wall, they would be saved. If even Meng Shuai could not break through, they would have nothing to say but accept their fate. Boom! In the next moment, Meng Shuai's godhead, which was as fast as a shooting star, crashed into the 5-colored light wall with a loud bang. The 5-colored light barrier within a radius of thousands of kilometers shook violently from the impact, creating layers of ripples in the air. Divine light and countless fragments of light burst out from the point of impact. Meng Shuai's all-out attack was indeed powerful. A few cracks appeared on the 5-colored light wall, and a series of cracking noises could be heard from it. Unfortunately, there were only cracks on the wall of light and it didn't shatter. And the incomparably powerful rebounding force sent Meng Shuai flying out backward. 2 more cracks appeared on his godhead, his injuries worsened and his consciousness blurred. When the 3 God Kings behind him saw that the situation was bad, they could not stop even if they wanted to. At this critical moment, they could only force themselves to change direction and scatter to the sides, brushing against the 5-colored light wall. They had failed this time. This also indicated that they would die without a doubt. Zhou Xian arrived soon after. He slashed at Meng Shuai's godhead with his sword. Meng Shuai was at the end of his tether. He was barely conscious and could not fight. He didn't even have the chance to dodge as he was struck by those sword lights. Boom! There was an earth-shattering explosion. Meng Shuai's godhead shattered into a dozen pieces and scattered in the sky. A peak God King, the right-hand man of the Azura God Emperor, and the second most powerful person on the boundless heaven continent, had fallen. When the other 3 God Kings saw the scene, they were dumbfounded. Their minds went blank. For hundreds of years, Meng Shuai had been a lofty, powerful and wise leader and overlord in their hearts. They regarded Meng Shuai as their idol, their pillar and their pillar of support. They had never thought that there would be a day when Meng Shuai would die so tragically. They could not believe it and they were unwilling to accept it. After all, Meng Shuai had been killed by Zhi Tianxing. There was no way they could escape from this formation. They were doomed. Zhou Tianxing waved his hand and grabbed Meng Shuai's godhead fragment and he put it away. Then he carried the divine hammer and the sword of burial of heaven and flew toward the godheads of the 3 God Kings. The 3 God Kings finally came to their senses. They were scared out of their wits and fled desperately. Unfortunately, their speed was nothing compared to Zhi Tianxing's. Zhi Tianxing teleported and caught up with one of the God King's godheads. He raised his sword and cut it into pieces. He waved his hand and collected the scattered godhead fragments. Then he teleported 8,000 miles and appeared in another direction. He caught up with another God King. Crack! Another slash and the God King's godhead was also cut into pieces. The 3rd God King's godhead fragment did not escape the fate and was killed 3 breaths later. At this point, the battlefield finally quieted down. Zhi Tianxing was the only one left. The 2,400 elite soldiers, including Meng Shuai, had all been killed by Zhi Tianxing. Zhi Tianxing's operation this time had come to a successful conclusion. He was not in a hurry to leave. He put away the divine hammer and the sword of burial of heaven and began to clean up the battlefield. The area within 10,000 miles had been reduced to ruins. There were pits and ravines everywhere. The wreckage of the 3 divine warships, the bones of more than 2,000 soldiers, and the broken armor and weapons were scattered in the ruins. Of course, there were also their space rings and godhead fragments. Zhi Tianxing only wanted to clean up the battlefield and count the spoils. He first collected more than 50 God King godhead fragments, then he collected more than 2,000 spatial rings. After doing all this in an hour, he waved his hand and struck the ground. Suddenly, the ruins within 10,000 miles surged with huge waves and completely reversed. All the wreckage, fragments and traces were buried by the soil. The ground was also restored to its original level. Zhi Tianxing then cast a spell to remove the formation and retrieve the 36 divine weapons that were scattered around. Whoosh! Whoosh whoosh whoosh! One by one, the divine weapons flew out from the bottom of the lake. They flew across the sky and returned to Ji Tianxing's hands. When the 36 divine weapons were all retrieved, the 5-colored light shield within 10,000 miles dissipated. Walala! The emerald lake water that was blocked outside by the 5-colored light shield suddenly surged and quickly filled up the empty space within 10,000 miles. Not long after, this place was submerged by the lake. When the lake returned to its calm state, all traces were covered as if nothing had happened. At this time, Ji Tianxing had already stepped on the road back to Yenshu's grotto heaven. He was still driving the deity-slaying warship flying high in the sky at lightning speed. Of course, this time he was not in a hurry to save people, so he did not go all out. This could save a lot of cultivation resources. Even if the deity-slaying warship was sailing at its normal speed, it was still 3 times faster than a peak divine king. In the cockpit of the warship, a few formations were operating normally. Ji Tianxing did not have time to check the spoils of war. He was worried about Nangong Ao's injuries. He took out the Jiutianzhu tower and entered the distorted spacetime. Zoosh. After a while, when he returned to the bottom of the Shuyan sacred tree, he saw Yun Yao, Jiku, Chao Qingyu, Lon, and the others gathered together to discuss something. He quickly walked over and saw everyone surrounding a cold jade bed. Nangong Ao, who was unconscious, was lying quietly on the bed. Previously, Nangong Ao's hair was disheveled and his body was covered in blood. He looked very miserable. At this moment he was still covered in wounds. However, the blood and disheveled hair on his body had been cleaned up. Ji Tianxing could see that everyone was very attentive to Nangong Ao. They did not hesitate to use their divine power to clean up his blood. Tianxing, you're back? Brother Tianxing, did you defeat the Meng Shuai? At this moment, everyone saw Ji Tianxing return. They raised their heads and looked at him with concern. Although they did not show up, they did not help Ji Tianxing in the battle. However, they knew that Ji Tianxing's mission was dangerous and difficult. They were worried for him. Now that they saw him return safely without any injuries, everyone was completely relieved. Chapter 4093. Ji Tianxing used his divine sense to check on Nangong Ao's condition and asked everyone what had happened. After he handed Nangong Ao over to everyone, they ended their cultivation and did their best to treat Nangong Ao. Yun Yao, Jiku, Chao Qingyu, and the others took turns to use divine techniques to help Nangong Ao control his injuries and replenish his divine power. Chao Qingyu was more attentive and even used his divine power to clean Nangong Ao's long hair and blood. Now, Nangong Ao's injuries were basically stable and his life was no longer in danger. However, his injuries were too severe and his spirit was too weak. He would probably sleep for another 10 days to half a month before he woke up. In addition, everyone also gave Nangong Ao a few divine pills to heal his injuries. After the effects of the divine pills were released, Nangong Ao's injuries would heal faster. After knowing this, Ji Tianxing was relieved and said to everyone, "Everyone, thank you for your hard work. Nangong Ao is usually very active. This is the first time I've seen him so quiet and embarrassed. As for Meng Shuai and his soldiers, don't worry, I've killed them all." Hearing this, everyone was shocked at first and then burst into cheers. Everyone was in disbelief. Really? Meng Shuai was a peak supreme god. You killed him so quickly? Didn't the intelligence say that Meng Shuai had more than 2,000 soldiers under his command? Most of them were supreme gods and there were more than 50 supreme gods. Master's ambush strategy this time was too successful. Could be said to be perfect. Under the Shura god emperor's command, there were 2 peak supreme gods guarding the boundless heaven continent. One was the imperial tutor and the other was the Meng Shuai. I'm afraid no one would have thought that Meng Shuai would be killed before the real battle even began. Yes. This is what it means to be victorious from the get-go. He killed one of the enemy's leaders in the first clash. The imperial preceptor is definitely going to be mad. We have to spread the news as soon as possible and let those ancient clans and forces who are still watching see how powerful our master is. Everyone was talking excitedly. Even Bai Long came to join in the fun. Everyone knew that this news was too exciting. Once it was spread, the entire boundless heaven continent would be shocked. The morale of the Shura god emperor's soldiers would be dealt a fatal blow. The morale of the rebel alliance under Ji Tianxing's command would be boosted and their confidence increased. However, Ji Tianxing waved his hand to stop everyone. Don't worry, the battle has just finished. The whole thing. After all, we have to go through with our act. At the very least, we have to wait until I return to Yanxu's cave before we release this news. Everyone thought Qin made sense. What the world knew was that the God of Swords had just left the cave of Yanxu not long ago and was on his way to the Zhenwu region. If the news of Meng Shuai's death was released now, no one would believe it. At the very least, everyone knew that the Sword God had used his clone to deceive everyone, including the 8 forces of the Anti-Rebels Alliance. Even if Ji Tianxing explained, the 8 forces would not take it to heart. However, no one knew what kind of rumors would spread. In short, this kind of thing would become an unstable factor and be used to sow discord between the Rebel Alliance. Alright, you guys put in some effort and take good care of Nangong Ao. Bai Long, help me pilot the Deity Slayer warship. Ji Tianxing planned to check the spoils of war in the distorted spacetime while he was on his way. However, the Deity Slayer warship needed someone to take care of it. Otherwise, it would be bad if it deviated or something happened. Bai Long gladly agreed and quickly followed Ji Tianxing out of the distorted spacetime and appeared in the cockpit of the warship. In the high-end and exquisite cockpit, the layout was simple and elegant. There were a total of more than 60 divine formations. However, only 8 of them were used to control the warship. Ji Tianxing spent a quarter of an hour to teach Bai Long how to pilot it. Bai Long was very smart. He learned it after just one lesson. Then he happily piloted the warship and rushed back to the Grotto Heaven according to the planned route. Ji Tianxing returned to the distorted spacetime and began to check the spoils of war. One day later, Ji Tianxing finished checking the spoils of war. Meng Shuai's shards of divinity and 57 deity kings' shards were sorted out by him. He had also gone through the interspatial rings of the 58 powerhouses. After a rough estimation, there were more than 30 trillion worth of cultivation resources. However, Ji Tianxing only wanted deity king-level cultivation resources, materials, elixirs and artifacts. The rest were thrown into the heaven-mending pearl for the 5 elements world to devour. After so many years, the divine power storm in the 5 elements world was still ongoing. There were still about 70% of the endless star crystal cores left. As for the space rings of more than 2,000 Sir Gods, Ji Tianxing only took a cursory look and did not check them one by one. Almost every interspatial ring had billions to tens of billions of cultivation resources stored in it. More than 2,000 space rings added up to more than 40 trillion worth of resources. It would be a pity to throw them away, but these resources were relatively low level. There were very few deity king level treasures. Ji Tianxing did not accept them. Instead, he threw the 2,000 space rings to Yun Yao, Ji Ku Chao Qingyu and the others. These are the spoils of war I picked up when I was cleaning up the battlefield. They are the space rings of those Sir Gods. Take your time to check them. Take whatever you want. Therefore, he threw this tedious task to everyone. Apart from cultivating, there was nothing else for them to do. Even something as boring as checking the space rings was new and interesting to them. Everyone gladly accepted the 2,000 space rings. After taking care of Nangong Ao, they began to search the rings. Although most of the space rings contained ordinary resources, their value was not too high. However, they would occasionally encounter some strange items and valuable treasures. This experience of digging for gold in the sand brought a lot of fun to everyone. While everyone was busy checking the space rings, Ji Tianxing meditated under the sacred tree. While he was recovering his strength, he was quietly planning his future plans. Everything had to be planned before acting. He had to see further ahead than the imperial tutor and plan earlier. Only then could he seize the initiative. For example, his ambush on the Meng Shuai could achieve such a perfect result because he had planned ahead and considered everything thoroughly. Unknowingly, 2 days had passed. The deity-slaying battleship was still in the center of the boundless heaven continent. It was still 2 days away from Yanxu Grotto Heaven. Today was the 14th of April. It was also the day that the Meng Shuai announced that he would kill Nangong Ao in public in the Empire of True Martial Arts. The people of the Empire of True Martial Arts had been waiting for this day with anticipation. Everyone thought that there would be a sea of people outside the gates of the capital. However, when tens of thousands of people ran to the gates at dawn, they found that the gates were tightly shut. The so-called killing of Nangong Ao in public would not happen at all. The confused and doubtful people asked around and realized that the atmosphere in the Empire of True Martial Arts was a little strange. Some of the well-informed experts